The desert at night is not silent. It breathes with an ancient heaviness, a weight of history that has never been lifted. The wind sweeps through the dunes as though whispering the secrets of kings long buried, secrets that were meant never to be disturbed. In the year of discovery, the archaeologists had not expected much. Their mission was routine, a survey of a familiar stretch of land near the Valley of the Kings, a place that had been combed and searched countless times before. But on that night, something unusual happened. A team member noticed a faint outline of a depression in the sand. Not remarkable on its own, but peculiar in how sharply it contrasted with the surrounding landscape. Brushing away the dust, they found the edge of stone. As more sand was removed, what emerged was not the collapsed wall of an ordinary burial shaft, but the corner of an entrance sealed with ancient plaster. There were no records of a tomb here, no markers in old maps, no references in temple archives. It was, in every sense, a tomb that should not exist. The entrance bore no royal insignia, yet the craftsmanship was exquisite. The plaster carried faint traces of hieroglyphs, almost erased, as if someone had deliberately tried to conceal its occupant. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of centuries, heavy and suffocating. The team descended cautiously, their torches illuminating paintings that should not have survived in such vividness. On the walls, a procession of figures moved in eternal silence, priests, warriors, and children who looked unnervingly regal. But it was not their beauty that stunned the archaeologists. It was the names. The cartouches, though chipped and damaged, revealed something astonishing. The titles belonged to a dynasty that should not have been here. This burial, tucked away in the desert, did not match any known family line of Egypt's kings. The inscriptions reference a lineage outside the recorded dynasties, a bloodline erased from every chronicle. And yet, here it was, staring back through the dust of thousands of years. One inscription was particularly haunting. It told of a child hidden from the wrath of the usurper, a royal heir taken into secrecy so that the family's blood might endure. The phrasing was deliberate, echoing the mythic language of divine succession. If the translation was correct, it implied that after one dynasty was overthrown, not every heir was destroyed. At least one was smuggled away into safety, preserved by loyal priests and guards. The further they explored, the stranger it became. Instead of the traditional single sarcophagus, the chamber contained multiple burials. Some were infants, some women, some men who bore the marks of noble status. This was not the tomb of one pharaoh, but a collective crypt, a hidden family vault. The faces painted on the walls were eerily lifelike, with almond eyes and stern expressions, almost as if their descendants had been meant to find them someday. But the most disturbing discovery lay deeper within. In a smaller chamber, tucked behind false walls, they found a coffin that bore no name. It was deliberately left blank, as though to conceal the identity of the body inside. Yet carved into the stone lid was a single symbol, the feather of Ma'at, the emblem of truth and divine order. Whoever lay within this coffin was not just royalty. There was someone meant to embody the very balance of the universe. The problem was that no such figure existed in the official histories of Egypt. Records of kings, even hated ones, usually survived in some form. Erased names could often be reconstructed. But this tomb, this family, did not exist in any catalogue. To admit its authenticity would be to admit that a royal bloodline had survived in shadows, hidden away by forces determined to keep them safe. The official narrative of Egypt's dynasties, so carefully constructed over centuries, would suddenly unravel. When word of the discovery began to circulate, debates erupted among scholars. Was this a forgery, planted in the desert to fool? But the radiocarbon tests on which fragments dated the chamber to more than 3,000 years ago. The pigments matched those used in the 18th dynasty. Even the style of hieroglyphs suggested authenticity. If this was a forgery, it was a masterwork that would have required knowledge no one possessed until modern times. And then came the rumors. Some claimed that the Ministry of Antiquities quietly sealed the tomb after only partial documentation, restricting access. Others whispered that items removed from the chamber vanished into private collections abroad, never to be seen again. A few members of the original team later refused interviews, their silence adding fuel to speculation that what they saw was far more than the public was allowed to know. The story of the tomb unsettled not just archaeologists but the Egyptian people themselves. If a forgotten family had survived, who were their descendants? Where had they gone? Were they absorbed into the priesthood, hidden in villages along the Nile, or perhaps carried away into foreign lands where their blood mingled with conquerors. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, that the divine blood of the pharaohs did not end with Cleopatra or Tutankhamun, but still ran quietly in living veins. As dawn broke over the desert, the wind shifted again, erasing the footprints that led to the hidden tomb. For millennia, the sands had protected its secret, and perhaps they were not finished yet. The team left with their photographs, their notes, and their questions that would ripple through history like cracks in stone. What if the pharaohs never truly died? What if their bloodlines had been preserved, not in the pages of history, but in the flesh of families who still walk among us? What if entire dynasties exist not in tombs, but in the present, their heritage hidden beneath the dust of time? The tomb that should not exist had forced open the door. Behind it lay a story not just of Egypt's kings, but a survival against all odds, a story that challenges everything we thought we knew about power, divinity, and the endurance of blood itself. And so the question remains, if one tomb could survive unseen for thousands of years, how many others wait beneath the sands? And what bloodlines do they protect? To understand the mystery of the hidden tomb and the survival of forbidden families, we must step back into the ancient mind, into a world where kings were not just rulers, but gods made flesh. For the Egyptians, the pharaoh was never merely a man. He was Horus incarnate, the falcon that soared between heaven and earth. He was the son of Ra, the living bridge between mortals and the eternal. To look upon his face was to look upon divinity. This belief was not a hollow ceremony. It was the core of Egyptian life. Every harvest, every law, every victory in war was tied to the belief that the pharaoh carried divine blood. If that blood was tainted, Egypt itself would falter. If it was pure, the Nile would flood, the crops would flourish, and the gods would smile upon the two lands. The king was Egypt, and Egypt was a king. To protect this sacred essence, the royal family guarded their blood with ruthless intensity. Marriages were arranged not for love, but for divinity. Sisters married brothers. Nieces married uncles. Mothers became consorts of their own sons. What to us seems unimaginable was, to them, a sacred duty, the preservation of a god's flesh in human form. Inbreeding was not seen as corruption, but as purification, a distillation of heavenly essence. But with this devotion came danger. A single egg, carrying the spark of divine blood, became more valuable than armies. Rival families schemed to eliminate them, while priests whispered the forgotten child might rise to restore the old order. The royal bloodline was at once the greatest blessing and the greatest curse. A family could rise to unimaginable heights because of it, and be hunted into oblivion for the very same reason. The Egyptians wrote hymns to their kings, praising them as a son that never dies, but behind the hymns lurked an anxiety that perhaps death could interrupt even the god's flesh. That anxiety explains why the dynasties poured endless wealth into tombs, into mummification, into rituals designed to preserve the body forever. If the flesh were preserved, the divine spark would not vanish. A pharaoh's corpse was not just a corpse. It was a container of sacred blood, a relic as holy as the temples themselves. Even in life, this belief had consequences. To rebel against a pharaoh was not merely treason. It was sacrilege. Killing him was killing a god. Yet history shows us that regicides did happen, coups did succeed, and dynasties were shattered. How then did Egyptians reconcile the death of a god? The answer was simple and terrifying. They never admitted the god had died. Instead, they rewrote history. Names were chiseled out of monuments. Images were smashed. Dynasties were reordered so that the broken line appeared unbroken. To them, the divine flesh could not be interrupted. If one pharaoh fell, another of the same blood must rise, no matter the violence it took to ensure it. This obsession created shadows within the royal family. Some heirs were erased not because they lacked divinity, but because their claim was too dangerous. Hidden sons, banished daughters, nephews smuggled into priestly orders. The record of Egyptian history is filled with silences that echo louder than words. What became of these forgotten heirs? Did they vanish into the sands? Or did they survive, carrying the sacred blood into obscurity? It is here that myth and history blur. Ancient hymns sometimes speak of the seed of Ra scattered like hidden stars, a poetic phrase that some Egyptologists believe refers to scattered royal descendants. In more practical terms, it was a recognition that divine flesh could not be entirely controlled. It could slip away, hidden in marriages, concealed in exile, waiting for a moment to re-emerge. The divine bloodline was not confined to palaces alone. Priests, too, claimed connection to the gods, and sometimes married into royal houses to strengthen their own authority. In doing so, they became guardians of the bloodline, a parallel dynasty hidden beneath the official one. While kings ruled from thrones, priests ruled from shadows, their veins carrying the same sacred flesh. And beyond Egypt's borders, the legend of divine flesh traveled. When foreign powers invaded, they sought to legitimize themselves not just with armies but with marriages. Greeks, Persians, and later Romans all intermarried with Egyptian royal lines, whether in truth or in claim. To hold even a drop of pharaonic blood was to claim divine legitimacy. Cleopatra herself leaned heavily on this, presenting her family as living gods long after the world outside had stopped believing. But here lies the twist. The very obsession with preserving divine flesh may have ensured its survival. Dynasties fell, but fragments of their bloodline slipped away, hidden among priests, nobles, villagers, even invaders. Unlike temples, unlike statues, unlike names carved in stone, blood could not be entirely erased. It could be diluted, concealed, forgotten, but not destroyed. The tomb we saw in the opening section begins to make more sense in this light. If a dynasty was overthrown, loyalists might have hidden its heirs, preserving the divine essence for future generations. If those heirs were placed into secret family vaults, or carried away into exile, their descendants may still walk among us today. The pharaohs, after all, were not just rulers of the past. They were gods in human form. If their bloodline endured, then in some sense, the gods themselves endured. But endurance came at a cost. The inbreeding that was meant to preserve divinity also sowed weakness, frailty, illness, deformity. The mummies of royal families often show signs of genetic disease. To preserve the flesh of gods, the pharaohs sometimes condemned themselves to physical decline. Yet the symbolism was too powerful to abandon. Even broken, even frail, the body of a god was still a god. This paradox, the simultaneous fragility and indestructibility of divine flesh, haunt Egyptian history. It is what makes the story of their bloodline so compelling, so mysterious. For if the pharaohs were gods, then their bloodline should never truly vanish. And if they have not vanished, then the families that never died might still be among us, hidden in plain sight. The tomb that should not exist hinted at such a possibility. But to understand how these hidden heirs might have been scattered, we must look back to the very beginnings of Egypt itself, when one man united the two lands and set in motion a chain of bloodlines that would haunt the world for thousands of years. Would you like me to continue and expand Section 3, The Hidden Heirs of Nama, in the same style, around 950 words, keeping the cinematic and mysterious tone? At the dawn of recorded history, before the pyramids rose against the horizon and before the Valley of the Kings became a city of the dead, there was Nama, the man who unified Egypt. Around 3100 BCE, Nama, remembered by later generations as the first pharaoh, bound together Upper and Lower Egypt under a single crown. In temples, he was celebrated as a conqueror, a bringer of order from chaos, the chosen of the gods. His palette, carved in stone, shows him striking down his enemies, towering in divine authority. But behind the images of triumph lies a more unsettling truth. The story of heirs who vanished from the record, heirs who may have seeded a lineage that lived outside official history. Nama's unification of the two lands was not a peaceful marriage but a bloody conquest. The North resisted him, and rebellions brewed for decades after his victory. To secure his throne, Nama, like many rulers who followed, relied on the power of blood. Marriages with rival princesses, arranged unions with priestly families, and offspring scattered across Egypt's political landscape became tools of survival. But not every heir could be acknowledged. Some were considered too dangerous, too closely tied to enemies, or too threatening to Nama's own line of succession. Here the mystery begins. Archaeological evidence shows burial from Nama's era where certain names have been deliberately scratched away. Some tombs contain offerings fit for royals, but without inscriptions to identify them. It is as if these people were meant to be remembered in silence, preserved in flesh, forgotten in name. Were these the hidden heirs of Nama? Egyptian tradition suggests they may have been. One fragmentary inscription from Abydos speaks of the sons of the falcon scattered like seeds, a poetic but chilling phrase. If Nama's court could not control every branch of his family, it may have hidden some of them away. A dangerous prince could be married into a priestly clan in Thebes, a rival daughter cloistered in a shrine of Itha, an infant son quietly spirited into the desert to be raised among loyal tribes. The goal was not destruction, but concealment. To erase a name was safer than to spill blood that carried the spark of the gods. Centuries later, scribes looking back on Nama's time struggled to piece together the exact succession of the first dynasty. The list of kings is broken, the order uncertain. Some rulers appear only briefly, their reigns abruptly ending, their families swallowed by silence. Could these gaps in history mark the places where hidden heirs slipped away? Instead of dying, they may have lived on beyond the palaces, their bloodline surviving where the monuments did not. The Nile itself was a perfect accomplice to such secrets. Its endless villages, its priestly estates, and its trade routes stretching into Nubia and Canaan created a vast web where royal children could disappear without trace. A boy born of Nama's blood might grow into a priest in a rural temple. A girl descended from him might be given as a wife to a local chieftain, her children carrying divine blood into obscurity. What began as dynastic control could, over centuries, scatter royal blood across countless families. Legends in Upper Egypt, even into the medieval period, spoke of the Falcon's line, families who claimed their descent reached back to Nama himself. Dismissed by many as folklore, these stories nevertheless hold echoes of a truth. Egyptians never fully let go of the idea that divine blood could not be extinguished. If Nama's heirs had been scattered, their descendants might have been seen as guardians of a secret inheritance, a thread tying present villages back to the very dawn of kingship. What makes this especially intriguing is how the pattern repeats. Later dynasties, when overthrown, often erased names, hid heirs, or quietly allowed rival families to survive under priestly protection. If this was common practice in later times, it is only natural that it began with the first dynasty itself. Nama's family, faced with resistance and rebellion, may have been the first to create the tradition of hidden heirs. But the stakes for Nama were higher than for those who came after him. He was not just defending a dynasty, he was defending the very concept of divine kingship. If his bloodline failed, the dream of a unified Egypt might collapse. To allow even one branch of his family to survive in obscurity was to build a safety net for the gods themselves. If the throne was usurped, a hidden heir could one day return. If enemies triumphed, the bloodline of the gods would endure in shadows. Some scholars argue that this explains the peculiar resilience of Egyptian kingship. Dynasties rose and fell, names were lost, but the institution of the pharaoh endured for 3,000 years. Behind each official line, perhaps, lay the quiet survival of forgotten heirs, descendants of Nama's original unification. His blood, scattered like seeds, may have taken root everywhere. The tomb that should not exist, discovered in modern times, now takes on a deeper meaning in this context. Its inscriptions about a child hidden from the usurper mirror the language first whispered in Nama's time. From the very beginning of Egyptian history, secrecy and survival went hand in hand. The gods' chosen flesh was never entirely destroyed. It was hidden, concealed until needed again. And so, when we speak of Nama, we must remember not only the king on the pallet, triumphant and divine, but the shadows cast by his family. For somewhere in those shadows, heirs were hidden. And if they survived then, through centuries of upheaval, perhaps they survived again and again, carrying the flame of divinity far beyond the reach of history. The story of the hidden heirs of Nama does not end with him. Instead, it becomes a blueprint for centuries of intrigue, assassination, and secret survival. The pattern is clearest when we look at what came after, the house of Horus itself, where betrayal, murder, and the survival of a single child could change the fate of empires. The story of Egypt's earliest dynasties is not one of calm succession, but of blood spilled inside the very palace walls. The Egyptians believed their king was Horus incarnate, the falcon soaring over the two lands, yet even divine flesh was not safe from betrayal. The house of Horus, as they called their royal line, became as much a battlefield as the desert surrounding the Nile. Assassination, usurpation, and fratricide stalked its halls like shadows cast by torchlight. From Nama's unification onward, every pharaoh's legitimacy was fragile. Rival claimants emerged, not from foreign invaders, but from brothers, cousins, even sons. A throne secured through conquest was always a throne vulnerable to murder. One of the earliest records speaks of a king whose reign ended abruptly, his name half erased from stone. Archaeologists suspect he was killed not by his enemies abroad, but by his own kin. Egypt's gods were supposed to protect the king, but often the deadliest threats came from those who shared his blood. Consider the Second Dynasty, a time remembered for turmoil and strange gaps in the king lists. A ruler named Peripson broke from tradition and abandoned Horus as his divine protector, replacing the falcon with the god Seth, a shocking betrayal of the royal ideal. Why? Some scholars argue he was not the rightful heir at all, but a usurper who seized power after killing his rival. His choice of Seth, god of chaos, may have been both a declaration and a curse. What happened to the heirs of Horus he displaced? Were they slaughtered in the palace, or spirited away, their bloodlines preserved in silence? Such mysteries repeat across dynasties. Archaeologists frequently find tombs of princes who never reigned, their monuments unfinished, their names erased. Sometimes these were victims of political purges, rivals eliminated to protect the ruling king. Yet in other cases, they were buried with full honors, suggesting a more complex story. Perhaps their deaths were staged, their names officially removed, while in reality, loyalists smuggled them into priesthoods or distant provinces. The Egyptian obsession with preserving bloodlines makes it unlikely they allowed every heir to perish. Some, surely, escaped the knife. The most haunting tales of palace intrigue often involve children. Imagine the scene. A boy born with the right to the double crown, raised in the seclusion of the palace nursery, suddenly thrust into danger as his father dies. His uncle or older brother seizes the throne, and the boy's fate hangs by a thread. In some accounts, these children vanish, their disappearance never explained. Were they drowned in the Nile, left in the desert, or hidden away, passed into the care of priests sworn to protect them until a day when the dynasty might be restored? It was a dangerous game, for Egypt could not admit instability. The king was a god. The god could not die at the hands of another man. So when murder took place, it was buried beneath ritual and rewriting. Inscriptions would describe the new ruler as chosen by the gods, never acknowledging that he might have seized power through bloodshed. Official records became masks, concealing the truth that divine kingship was upheld not only by faith but by the blade. This silence makes the whispers of survival even more intriguing. Every erased name hints at a hidden heir. Every unfinished tomb suggests a life cut short or relocated into obscurity. The Priests of Egypt, who held enormous influence, may have played the double role of executioner and protector, eliminating threats for one king, while preserving bloodline for another. They were the keepers of ritual, but perhaps also the keepers of secret heirs. Stories from later periods echo this theme. The tale of Horus himself, mythic son of Osiris, reflect the pattern of Egypt's rulers. Osiris is murdered by his brother Seth, and Horus, as a hidden child, grows in secrecy until he can reclaim the throne. It is myth, but it is also history disguised as story. The Egyptians, in retelling Horus's struggle, were retelling their own dynasty's struggles. Brothers killing brothers, hidden sons waiting in shadows, bloodlines reserved by secrecy until the moment of return. One particularly chilling inscription describes a rebellion crushed by a king who boasted, "I have shattered the eggs of Horus before they could hatch." Scholars believe this refers not to literal eggs, but to rival heirs, children eliminated before they could grow into threats. Yet the very phrasing betrays anxiety. The eggs of Horus were many, scattered across the land. How could any king be sure he had destroyed them all? Archaeological finds add weight to these suspicions. In certain provincial cemeteries, skeletons have been unearthed with burial goods suggesting royal descent, jewelry marked with falcon imagery, miniature crowns, emblems of kingship. But these individuals never appear in king lists. Who were they? Forgotten cousins? Or the heirs who were meant never to be remembered? For the people of Egypt, these disappearances carried a dangerous hope. If a king was cruel or illegitimate, whispers of a hidden heir could spark rebellion. The idea that somewhere a true son of Horus lived in concealment, ready to return, became a recurring dream. It was both political weapon and spiritual comfort. The god's blood was never truly extinguished, only hidden. And so the pattern was established. Dynasties born in bloodshed, preserved through secrecy, rewritten in stone to appear eternal. Murder in the house of Horus was not an exception but a tradition. Yet each act of violence planted seeds of survival. Each hidden heir carried the possibility of resurgence. The tomb discovered in modern times, with its inscriptions about a child saved from a usurper, is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a thread that stretches back to the very first dynasties. From Nama onward, Egypt was never only about thrones and crowns. It was about blood, blood spilled, blood hidden, blood remembered. And the story grows darker still in the age of Akhenaten, the heretic king who defied gods and tradition alike. His children, erased from history, may represent the most extraordinary case of all, heirs deliberately hidden not for survival of the throne, but for survival of an idea. When history speaks of Akhenaten, it remembers him as Egypt's heretic pharaoh, the king who turned his back on the gods of his ancestors. He closed the temples of Amun, abandoned Thebes, and built a new capital at Amarna, devoted entirely to Aten, the blazing sun disk. To the Egyptians of his time, this was nothing less than sacrilege. To his enemies, it was proof that he was unfit to rule. Yet hidden in the shadow of his revolution lies another story, one far more delicate and dangerous: the fate of his children. Akhenaten fathered several daughters, and possibly sons, though their lives are shrouded in mystery. Reliefs show him doting on his young daughters, cradling them on his lap, kissing them in intimate family scenes unlike anything seen in Egyptian art before. This was a royal family portrayed with startling humanity, almost unsettling in its vulnerability. But what happened to these children after Akhenaten's downfall is one of the great enigmas of ancient history. When Akhenaten died, his religious revolution collapsed almost overnight. The priests of Amun regained their power, the temples reopened, and the capital of Amarna was abandoned to the sands. But what of the heirs who had been raised within this forbidden world? These children had lived their entire lives in a city devoted to Aten, trained to honor a single god their people now despised. Their very existence threatened the restored order. The official histories are almost silent. Their names vanish from inscriptions, their faces chiseled from stone. It is as though someone deliberately sought to erase them from memory. Smenkhkare, a mysterious successor who may have been Akhenaten's son or son-in-law, flickers briefly in the record before disappearing. Nefertiti herself may have ruled as a pharaoh in disguise, yet her end is just as uncertain. And then there is the most enigmatic figure of all, Tutankhaten, the boy who will be renamed Tutankhamun. Tutankhaten was likely a son of Akhenaten, though even this is debated. If he was indeed the heretic king's child, his survival is astonishing. To preserve him, he had to be transformed. His very name was changed from honoring Aten to honoring Amun. Tutankhamun became the Restoration King, the symbol of Egypt's return to orthodoxy. But one cannot help but wonder, was he truly loyal to the priests who remade him, or was he merely a child swept along by forces he could not control? And what of his siblings? Here the mystery deepens. Archaeologists have found tombs containing the mummified remains of 2 infant girls, buried in Tutankhamun's own sepulchre. Were these his daughters? If so, why were they laid to rest with him rather than with their mother? Some scholars suggest they were symbolic sacrifices, children whose survival threatened dynastic plans. Others believe they may have been preserved deliberately, as though Tutankhamun hoped to keep his bloodline close even in death. Even more intriguing is the possibility that other children of Akhenaten survived in secret. Some theories propose that princesses were smuggled into distant provinces, married off quietly to erase their connection to the heretic king. Others suggest they entered the priesthood, hidden under new names, serving the very gods their father once defied. If true, it would mean the blood of Akhenaten ran silently through Egypt long after his name was cursed. The story of Akhenaten's forbidden children is more than just a question of genealogy. It is a reflection of Egypt's terror of memory itself. To erase a name was to condemn a soul to oblivion. To preserve a bloodline was to risk the return of a heresy that had nearly torn the kingdom apart. Every decision surrounding these children, whether to kill, conceal, or transform them, was a battle over Egypt's future. The Amarna period casts a long shadow in archaeology. In the abandoned city, shattered statues of Akhenaten lie face down in the dust, their faces mutilated beyond recognition. Reliefs of his daughters are hacked away, leaving only faint outlines of their bodies. Yet every erasure speaks louder than silence. The deliberate destruction suggests fear. These children mattered enough to erase, which means they may have mattered enough to survive. Consider again Tutankhamun's own short reign. Though presented as a darling of Amun's priests, his tomb paints a more complicated picture. Hidden among the treasures are items that still honor Aten, small amulets, Faint symbols overlooked or deliberately preserved. Was the boy king quietly acknowledging his true heritage? If so, then the survival of Akhenaten's children was not just physical but spiritual. The heresy lived on, even in the heart of Egypt's restored orthodoxy. For centuries, rumors of hidden heirs haunted Egypt. The Amun bloodline became a subject of whispered speculation. Did a daughter of Akhenaten survive to marry a general, passing her blood into another dynasty? Did a son escape execution, only to die in exile? Even today, DNA studies on royal mummies spark fierce debates, with some evidence pointing to tangled genetic ties among the Amun family. The truth remains elusive, but every discovery adds weight to the idea that Akhenaten's children were not entirely erased. In myth, the Egyptians told of the sun god Ra, who traveled through the underworld each night, disappearing from the world of the living, only to rise again at dawn. Perhaps Akhenaten's forbidden children followed the same path, vanishing into the shadows, only to reappear in unexpected forms generations later. The silence of history is never empty. It is filled with secrets deliberately hidden, with stories erased because they were too dangerous to remember. The forbidden children of Akhenaten remind us that the past is not only about what survives in stone, but about what was meant to be forgotten. And yet, against all odds, their presence lingers in the fragments of statues, in the DNA of mummies, in the unanswered questions that refuse to die. In the end, the fate of Akhenaten's children is more than an archaeological puzzle. It is a haunting symbol of the tension between memory and oblivion, faith and heresy, power and survival. They were heirs to both a throne and a forbidden god, caught in a struggle that defined an empire. And whether hidden, transformed, or destroyed, they remind us that no attempt to erase blood ever truly succeeds. The river of history, like the Nile, always carries traces of what it seeks to conceal. In the Valley of the Kings, where the sun strikes the cliffs in burning gold, the ancient dead sleep in silence. Beneath the desert skin, hundreds of tombs lie carved into stone, some plundered, some intact, many still unknown. Yet within this necropolis, whispers of another burial haunt the imagination of scholars, the lost tomb of Akhenaten's children. Was there once a chamber hidden deep beneath the sands, filled not with kings and queens, but with the fragile heirs who carried the most dangerous bloodline in Egypt? Clues emerge like fragments of a half-buried story. In Tutankhamun's tomb, the discovery of two tiny mummies, believed to be stillborn daughters of the boy king, startled archaeologists. Their presence suggests a tradition. Children of forbidden blood entombed alongside their parents, their short lives woven into the narrative of dynastic continuity. But why were these infant daughters placed in their father's resting place, rather than granted their own burial? Was it a gesture of grief, or a desperate attempt to protect their memory from those who wished it erased? Some Egyptologists argue that if Tutankhamun's daughters were buried in his tomb, then perhaps other children of the Amun bloodline were hidden elsewhere, in unmarked or concealed chambers. The Valley of the Kings, after all, still guards secrets. Entire tombs have been discovered beneath the feet of tourists who walked unknowingly above them for decades. What if somewhere, cut into limestone walls and sealed by rubble, lies the true resting place of Akhenaten's forbidden offspring? The question grows more tantalizing when considering KV-63, a mysterious chamber discovered in 2005 near Tutankhamun's tomb. At first, archaeologists believed they had found another royal burial. Instead, the chamber revealed coffins, jars, and materials associated with mummification, but no mummies. Was KV-63 a preparation chamber for royal children who never reached adulthood? Some scholars have suggested that its emptiness tells a darker story. The mummies once placed there were deliberately removed or destroyed, erasing evidence of their existence. Then there's KV-55, one of the most controversial tombs ever uncovered in the valley. Inside lay a desecrated coffin, its inscription scratched out, its occupant disfigured by time and deliberate sabotage. Most evidence points to Akhenaten himself being buried there hurriedly and without honor. Yet around the body were fragments hinting at a family connection, items linked to Tai, Akhenaten's mother, and possibly to his daughters. If KV-55 was a place of exile for the heretic pharaoh, might it also have been a temporary resting place for the children too dangerous to bury elsewhere? The Amun period was an age of erasures. Names hacked from monuments, faces chipped away from reliefs, entire histories rewritten by those who despised the heresy of Aten. In such an age, the burial of children was not merely a matter of grief but of politics. To allow Akhenaten's children proper tombs would have given legitimacy to their memory. To bury them secretly, or hide their remains in the tombs of others, was a way of extinguishing their identity. Yet the fact that fragments of their presence remain suggests that erasure was never complete. DNA testing in the 21st century has deepened the mystery. Studies on royal mummies have revealed tangled genetic ties among the Amun family. One female mummy from KV 35, known as a younger lady, has been identified as Tutankhamen's mother, possibly a daughter of Akhenaten. If so, then a bloodline of forbidden children continued not only through Tutankhamen but through intermarriages that entwined the royal family in genetic secrecy. And if one daughter survived to give birth to a pharaoh, who is to say others did not survive, their remains hidden in still undiscovered tombs? Archaeologists searching the Valley of the Kings speak often of anomalies detected by ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the tomb of Tutankhamen itself, some claim there are unexplored chambers. Nicholas Reeves, a leading Egyptologist, proposed that one of these could be the lost tomb of Nefertiti, or of a royal child from Amarna. Imagine, if true, behind sealed walls, untouched for millennia, the bones of forbidden heirs waiting to be found. Yet the mystery of the lost tomb is not only about archaeology. It is about the psychological fear of memory. To the priests who restored Amun supremacy, the survival of Akhenaten's children was a nightmare. Their blood carried the spark of heresy, the possibility of another Atenist rebellion. To destroy them outright would have been dangerous. It risked turning them into martyrs. To bury them secretly, in hidden chambers without inscriptions, ensured their silence. But silence can be broken, and secrets buried in stone do not always stay buried. Consider the symbolism of the Valley of the Kings itself. Each tomb was meant to ensure eternal life through memory. Hieroglyphs on walls, painted scenes of the afterlife, invocations to Osiris and Ra. These were meant to guide souls through eternity. Yet if Akhenaten's children were buried without names, without inscriptions, their tombs would have been places of negation rather than remembrance. They would have been interred in silence, trapped between memory and oblivion. And yet, paradoxically, that very silence makes them irresistible to us today. Modern Egyptology is haunted by the idea of unfinished discovery. Every time sand shifts in the valley, every time radar reveals a hollow beneath the earth, speculation reignites. Could this be the tomb of Nefertiti? Could this be the lost princess of Amarna? Could this be the burial of Tutankhamen's children, finally revealed to the world? Each question brings us closer to a revelation, and closer to confronting the uncomfortable truth that history is never fully under our control. The lost tomb of the children, whether real or imagined, is more than an archaeological curiosity. It is a metaphor for how history itself hides truths it cannot bear to confront. These children, who once played in the sunlit courts of Amarna, were condemned to vanish. Yet their absence became their presence. Every missing name, every hacked-out face, every erased cartouche cries out louder than inscriptions ever could. And so, the sands still wait. Somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, beneath rock and silence, the story of the forbidden children may yet lie sealed in darkness. Whether we uncover it or not, the legend of their tomb endures, a shadow in the desert, a reminder that the blood of pharaohs never truly dies. Curses are among the most enduring legends of ancient Egypt. They cling to tombs, to treasures, to names etched into stone. But few bloodlines are said to have carried a curse as heavy as the descendants of Akhenaten. For generations, whispers claim that the Amarna family bore not only political disgrace but divine retribution, a doom that stalked their children, poisoning their futures, and echoing through the corridors of Egyptian history. It begins with Akhenaten himself. His radical devotion to Aten shattered centuries of tradition, enraging the powerful priesthood of Amun. To his followers, he was a prophet. To his enemies, a dangerous heretic. In the minds of many Egyptians, his rejection of the gods was more than betrayal, it was blasphemy. And blasphemy demanded punishment, not just for him, but for his bloodline. In a culture where divine order held the world together, to defy the gods was to invite chaos upon one's family. The deaths of Akhenaten's heirs seemed to confirm the fear. Tutankhamen, the boy king who sought to restore Amun's worship, died before reaching adulthood. His mummy reveals a young body ravaged by illness, deformities, and injuries that still spark debate. Was he killed by enemies at court? Was his death the price of his father's heresy? Or was he simply a victim of genetic frailty, the result of a royal family intermarried for too many generations? Whatever the cause, his premature death became a symbol of fragility. The bloodline was fading, unable to endure. The curse narrative grew stronger with each tragedy. The mummified remains of two infant daughters in Tutankhamun's tomb seemed to embody the failure of his line to continue. Scholars examining their tiny bodies noted deformities, adding weight to the theory of a tainted lineage. In ancient Egyptian eyes, such frailty could only be read as a wrath of the gods, a visible mark that the children of Akhenaten were not meant to rule. Even Nefertiti, whose beauty and power were once unmatched, disappears mysteriously from the historical record. Some believe she ruled briefly under another name, perhaps as a pharaoh in disguise. Others suggest she fell victim to palace intrigue or priestly vengeance. Whatever her fate, her sudden vanishing adds the aura of doom that surrounded the Amun household. One by one, their names were erased, their monuments defaced, their bodies hidden. It was as though Egypt itself sought to expunge them, as though some invisible hand worked to blot them out. But the so-called curse was not only myth. It was political theater. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt's rulers had every reason to portray the Amun line as cursed, unfit to hold the throne. By associating their deaths with divine punishment, the priesthood of Amun reinforced their own authority. They were the guardians of tradition, the intermediaries between gods and men. The destruction of the Amun bloodline was, to them, proof that no king could defy the gods and live. Yet the persistence of their story suggests something more. When archaeologists uncovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world was captivated not just by gold and treasures, but by the myth of a curse. Several members of Howard Carter's team died under strange circumstances, and newspapers sensationalized every incident as a curse of the pharaoh. Though Carter himself lived for years afterward, the legend stuck, and in the shadow of Tutankhamun's fragile remains, the notion that his family carried a doom seemed almost believable. Modern science complicates the tale. DNA studies suggest that Tutankhamun's frailties were not divine punishment, but the result of generations of incestuous unions within the royal family. Clubfoot, cleft palate, and malaria parasites were discovered in his remains. The so-called curse may have been biological, written into their blood rather than decreed by the gods. Yet even this explanation feels like a curse of another kind. The tragic result of power's obsession with purity, a dynasty consumed by its own desire to keep its bloodline intact. And still, something uncanny lingers. The Amun line is remembered differently from other royal families. The names of Rameses or Thutmose evoke grandeur, conquest, and stability. The names of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun evoke whispers of mystery, fragility, and loss. Their images are beautiful yet haunting. Their reigns were glorious yet brief. Their monuments, once luminous with sunlit devotion, now lie shattered and half-buried in sand. It is as though the family never truly belonged to the living world, but was destined always to dwell half in shadow. Consider the Egyptians' own beliefs about curses. They did not see them as magic spells alone, but as natural consequences of divine balance. To disrupt Ma'at, the cosmic order, was to invite imbalance, which would ripple across generations. Akhenaten disrupted Ma'at on a grand scale, rejecting the pantheon of gods that had held Egypt together for centuries. His children, and their children after them, paid the price in illness, early deaths, and political annihilation. To the Egyptian mind, this was no coincidence. It was justice. And yet, justice is a strange way of echoing. For all the attempts to erase them, the Amun line is the one that obsesses us still. Tourists do not line up to see the tomb of Seti I, magnificent though it is. They come to see Tutankhamun, the sickly boy whose reign was short, whose bloodline ended in silence, but whose memory outlived all others. If there is a curse, perhaps it is this: the very family Egypt sought to forget became the most famous of all. In this sense, the curse of the Amun line is not only about death, but about immortality. They were doomed to vanish, yet they remain. They were condemned as heretics, yet their faces adorn museums worldwide. The curse did not destroy them, it transformed them into eternal enigmas. The bloodline of the heretic king may have ended in flesh, but in story, in fascination, it never died. And so the legend of the curse continues, woven from both myth and reality. Perhaps it was divine wrath, perhaps it was genetic fragility, perhaps it was political propaganda. But whatever its nature, it gave the Amun line a haunting aura that endures even now. To walk among their statues, to gaze upon Tutankhamun's golden mask, is to feel the weight of something unfinished, a curse not of destruction, but of eternal memory. She was the most beautiful woman of her age, the queen whose image has endured for more than 3,000 years. Nefertiti, the great royal wife of Akhenaten, appears in reliefs with her husband and daughters, her graceful profile crowned by the tall blue headdress that has become one of the most iconic symbols of ancient Egypt. She was more than a consort. She was a partner in revolution, standing at Akhenaten's side as he turned Egypt's religion upside down. And then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The disappearance of Nefertiti is one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. For over a decade, she is depicted everywhere, smiting enemies like a pharaoh, riding chariots, receiving foreign dignitaries, even worshipping Aten alone. Her power was unprecedented for a queen. Yet after the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, her image disappears from the monuments. Her name is erased from inscriptions. It is as though she simply ceased to exist. Scholars have debated her fate for generations. Did she die unexpectedly, claimed by illness or plague in the crowded city of Amarna? Did she fall out of favor with Akhenaten, replaced by another wife or consort in the delicate balance of palace politics? Or did something even more extraordinary happen? Did she transform herself into Pharaoh, ruling Egypt in disguise? Each theory is as compelling as it is controversial, and each adds another layer to the enigma of her bloodline. One possibility is that Nefertiti died and was quietly buried in Amarna. Evidence suggests that a plague swept through the city during Akhenaten's reign, claiming many lives. If the queen succumbed, her body may lie in a yet undiscovered tomb near the ruins of Akhenaten. But this explanation feels too simple for a woman whose presence was so powerful, whose legacy demanded a grander stage. The Egyptians recorded the deaths of their royals with elaborate rituals. The silence around Nefertiti's end suggests something more deliberate. Another theory proposes that Nefertiti was disgraced, her memory intentionally suppressed. Some inscriptions appear to show another royal wife, Kia, rising in prominence toward the end of Akhenaten's reign. Could she have replaced Nefertiti, pushing the once great queen into obscurity? If true, it would explain the sudden disappearance of her name, the deliberate erasure of her images. Yet it also raises another question. How could such a powerful queen, worshipped as the embodiment of beauty and authority, simply be erased without trace? The most tantalizing theory is that Nefertiti did not disappear at all. She changed her identity. Some scholars argue she assumed the throne under the name Pharaohs, or even as Smenkhkare, a shadowy figure who ruled briefly after Akhenaten's death. In this scenario, Nefertiti became pharaoh herself, ruling in the chaotic years between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. If true, her disappearance was not a fall from power, but a transformation into the most dangerous role a woman in Egypt could hold, king. This theory gained momentum when inscriptions surfaced showing a female pharaoh ruling near the end of the Amarna period. The name Pharaohs, part of Nefertiti's own full name, appeared on artifacts. Could this have been her, ruling in her own right after Akhenaten's death? The possibility electrified Egyptology, casting Nefertiti not as a victim of fate, but as a master of it, a queen who bent tradition to carve her own destiny. Yet her tomb remains elusive. For decades, archaeologists have searched the Valley of the Kings and the cliffs around Amarna for her resting place. Some believe she lies in a sealed chamber behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb, suggested by radar scans that revealed hidden voids. Others argue her body may already have been found, in the mummy known as a younger lady from KV-35, whose DNA links her to Tutankhamun's family. But this mummy's face is damaged, her identity uncertain, her story fractured. Could this be Nefertiti, stripped of recognition even in death? The disappearance of Nefertiti carries profound implications for the survival of the Amarna bloodline. If she truly ruled as pharaoh, then the line of Aten's heirs endured longer than the priests of Amun wished to admit. If she was erased, then her children, 6 daughters, possibly more, were left vulnerable, their futures uncertain and a caught consumed by vengeance. Her absence shaped the destiny of her descendants, casting them into a struggle for survival in a world eager to forget their father's heresy. But perhaps her greatest survival was not of flesh, but of memory. The bust of Nefertiti, discovered in 1912 in Amarna and now displayed in Berlin, has become one of the most recognizable artifacts in the world. Her serene face, perfectly symmetrical, gazes across time with a power that outshines the erasures of her enemies. Egypt tried to forget her, yet today she is remembered more vividly than almost any other queen. Her disappearance, paradoxically, ensured her immortality. There is also something symbolic in her vanishing. Nefertiti embodied Aten's revolution, beauty, light, and devotion to a single god. When the revolution collapsed, she too disappeared, as though her fate was bound to the sun disk itself. Perhaps her absence was not just a historical accident, but a myth in itself, the queen of the sun fading like the evening light, swallowed by darkness, destined to rise only in legend. And so the question lingers, where is Nefertiti? In a hidden chamber beneath the Valley of the Kings? In a looted tomb long since lost? In the broken remains of an unnamed mummy, her identity stolen forever? Or does she survive only in the painted limestone bust that has traveled the world, her beauty both eternal and untouchable? Her disappearance is not just a story of loss, but of transformation. Queens in Egypt were meant to support kings, not eclipse them. Yet Nefertiti's vanishing act has given her more power than any recorded life could. She has become the eternal enigma of Egypt, her silence louder than words, her absence more enduring than presence. In the story of the bloodlines of the Pharaohs, Nefertiti's disappearance stands as a turning point. It marks the moment when the Amun family passed from history into legend, when flesh and blood became myth. And perhaps that is a true answer. Nefertiti never disappeared at all. She simply stepped into the realm of mystery, where she has ruled ever since. The name Tutankhamun conjures images of glittering gold, of a boy king whose untouched tomb stunned the world when Howard Carter Pride opened its doors in 1922. Yet behind the dazzling mask lies a darker truth. Tutankhamun was a child born of a cursed bloodline, a fragile boy who should never have survived infancy, let alone ascended the throne of Egypt. His reign was short, his health broken, and his death shrouded in mystery. To understand his story is to grasp the frailty of the Amun line, and the devastating cause of Akhenaten's heretical experiment. Tutankhamun was born Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, a name that tethered him to his father's radical cult. His parentage has been the subject of fierce debate, but genetic studies of royal mummies revealed that he was the son of Akhenaten and an unnamed sister wife. This meant that Tutankhamun was a product of incest, a dangerous practice that had long been tolerated in Egyptian royalty as a way of keeping bloodlines pure. But what it preserved in name, it destroyed in body. Tutankhamun's genetic inheritance doomed him to a life of illness. Evidence from his mummified remains paints a harrowing picture. His spine was deformed, his skull elongated, and his left foot twisted by a severe clubfoot that forced him to walk with canes. At least 130 walking sticks were found in his tomb, not symbols of kingly power, but necessities for movement. CT scans revealed necrosis in his bones, signs of malaria in his blood, and fractures that may have come from either a full or a violent end. Far from the godlike perfection expected of a pharaoh, Tutankhamun was frail, sickly, and physically vulnerable. He was a king who could barely stand. And yet, this broken child inherited the most powerful throne in the ancient world. Around the age of 9, he became king after the mysterious disappearance of Akhenaten and the shadowy rulers who followed him. But Tutankhamun was no true ruler. He was a pawn, a boy controlled by powerful advisors eager to restore Egypt to its former order. Chief among them was the aged Vizier A and the ruthless General Horem. Through the young king, they reversed Akhenaten's heresy, abandoning Aten and reviving the old gods. Temples of Amun were rebuilt, the priesthood restored, and Egypt's wounds slowly healed. Even Tutankhamun's name was changed, from Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. This shift was more than symbolic. It was a deliberate attempt to erase the Amun experiment and reintegrate the monarchy with the timeless traditions of Egypt. The boy king became the figurehead of this restoration. His image used to legitimize decisions he was too young and too frail to make. Despite his weakness, Tutankhamun fulfilled the one duty expected of a pharaoh, producing heirs. He was married to Akhenaten, his half-sister and the daughter of Nefertiti. Their union, like his parents before him, was plagued by tragedy. 2 fetuses were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, stillborn daughters, fragile reminders of a dynasty unraveling under weight of its own blood. The incest that had defined the Amun family left it barren, incapable of sustaining its line. With Tutankhamun's death, the bloodline of Akhenaten collapsed. The cause of that death remains a mystery. Some argue that his frail body finally gave out, malaria, a degenerative bone disease, and the complications of his deformities converging to cut short his life at around 18 or 19 years of age. Others whisper of darker ends, assassination, conspiracy, or ritualized murder. A fracture in his skull led to theories of a blow to the head, though later studies suggest this may have been damage inflicted after death. More compelling is the shattered condition of his ribs and sternum, missing entirely from his mummy. Was this the result of a chariot accident, a fall, or a deliberate attempt to desecrate his body in the embalming process? If Tutankhamun was murdered, the suspects are clear. A. The vizier who succeeded him had the most to gain, marrying Akhenaten to legitimize his claim to the throne. Horem, the general waiting in the wings, may also have desired the throne. Tutankhamun was young, weak, and childless, the perfect target for ambitious men who wanted power. His death cleared the way for Egypt to return fully to orthodoxy, severing the last tie to Akhenaten's heresy. And yet, even in death, Tutankhamun's story was not finished. His burial was hasty, rushed, and strangely modest for a king. Many of the treasures in his tomb appear to have been taken from other burials, repurposed for him. The famous golden mask, so often associated with his image, bears evidence of having been reworked, possibly made originally for Nefertiti. His tomb itself was unusually small, more fitting for a noble than a pharaoh. It was as though Tutankhamun's death had caught Egypt unprepared, or worse, as though his successors wanted to bury him quickly and quietly, erasing him as they had erased his father. But fate had other plans. Because Tutankhamun was buried in such a modest tomb, hidden beneath rubble and forgotten, it escaped the looting that robbed the graves of greater pharaohs. For over 3,000 years, it lay untouched, a time capsule of Egypt's golden age. When Howard Carter opened it, the world gasped. The treasures within, the gold mask, the chariots, the jewelry, the shrines, became symbols of Egypt itself. Tutankhamun, the sickly boy king who left no heirs, no victories, no lasting monuments, became the most famous pharaoh of all. His fame is laced with irony. In life, he was powerless, a child manipulated by stronger men, his body crippled by the very bloodline that gave him the throne. In death, he became immortal, his face known across the world, his name synonymous with Egypt's ancient glory. The boy who should not have lived now lives forever, his broken body transformed into eternal gold. But his story is also a warning. Tutankhamun's life illustrates the fragility of dynasties built on incest, the dangers of revolutions that alienate tradition, and the way individuals can be consumed by forces far greater than themselves. He was the last true heir of Akhenaten, the final flicker of a doomed line. When he died, the Amun experiment ended. Egypt turned its back on the heresy of Aten, erasing his father, his mother, his family from memory. Only Tutankhamun survived, not as a king of Egypt, but as a legend of the modern world. In the story of Bloodlines, Tutankhamun stands as both a victim and a miracle. He should not have lived. He should not have ruled. And yet, against all odds, his survival, however brief, ensured that the world would never forget the dynasty that almost destroyed Egypt. His gold mask stays at us across millennia, a face both fragile and eternal, a reminder that even broken bloodlines can achieve immortality in memory. Tutankhamun's death left Egypt standing on the edge of uncertainty. A kingdom that had endured the chaos of Akhenaten's heresy and the fragile restoration of a boy king now faced a crisis. Who would inherit the throne when the bloodline of the heretics had collapsed? The Amun dynasty, once filled with children of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, had dwindled into silence. Tutankhamun's stillborn daughters offered no future, and with his passing, the sacred bloodline of the Aten worshippers came to an end. But Egypt could not be left leaderless, and into this void stepped two men, the cunning vizier, and Horem, the ambitious general, both eager to seize a crown for themselves. Had long been a fixture in the royal court. He had served under Akhenaten, navigating the dangerous tides of the Amun experiment with skill, and during Tutankhamun's reign he had acted as a guiding hand, shaping the policies of the boy king. By the time Tutankhamun died, he was elderly, but he wielded enormous influence and knew how to manipulate the fragile structures of power. He was also connected to the royal family by marriage. His wife, had been Nefertiti's nurse, giving him a thread of legitimacy to claim the throne. When the opportunity presented itself, A moved swiftly. Tutankhamun's widow, Akhenaten, found herself in a perilous position. Barely out of her teens, she was suddenly alone in a court filled with men who saw her not as a grieving wife but as a last key to legitimacy. Without Tutankhamun, her role became both essential and dangerous. She could provide a link to the bloodline of Akhenaten, but her vulnerability left her prey to political maneuvering. In her desperation, she made a move unprecedented in Egyptian history. She reached out to a foreign king. A letter, discovered centuries later in the archives of the Hittite Empire, reveals Akhenaten's extraordinary plea. Addressed to Suppiluliuma I, the mighty Hittite ruler, she begged him to send her one of his sons as her husband. She wrote, "My husband has died and I have no son. They say you have many sons. If you send me one, he will become my husband and king of Egypt. I am afraid." This was a shocking request. For an Egyptian queen to ask for a foreigner to sit on the throne was unthinkable, a betrayal of every tradition. Yet Akhenaten was desperate enough to risk everything rather than be forced into marriage with Suppiluliuma, astonished but intrigued, agreed. He prepared to send his son Zenanza to Egypt to wed Akhenaten and claim the throne. But the plan ended in blood. Zenanza never arrived. On the way, he was ambushed and murdered, likely on A's orders. To A, the idea of a foreign prince ruling Egypt was intolerable. By removing the Hittite heir, he secured his own path to the throne. Soon after, A married Akhenaten, tying himself to the royal family and legitimizing his claim. Reliefs show him presiding over Tutankhamun's burial, a symbolic act that declared his new status as pharaoh. His reign, however, was short and quiet, lasting only about 4 years. During that time, he worked to stabilize Egypt and distance it further from the Amun heresy. Yet his name never carried the weight of a true king, and his legacy was fragile from the start. Akhenaten, too, disappears from history after their marriage. Some suggest she was murdered, others that she faded into obscurity, erased as thoroughly as the Amun kings themselves. But A was not the only contender for power. In the background, Horem, commander of Egypt's armies, waited with patience and ambition. A commoner by birth, Horem had risen through the military ranks to become Egypt's most powerful general. His loyalty had been to the stability of Egypt, and he despised the Amun rulers for the chaos they had brought. Under Tutankhamun, he had been named heir should the boy die childless, but A's maneuvering had denied him the throne. Still, Horem was not a man easily defeated. When A died, Horem seized his chance. With no legitimate heirs to oppose him, he claimed the throne as pharaoh. His reign marked the true end of the Amun line. Where A had merely attempted to stabilize Egypt, Horem sought to erase a heretical dynasty entirely. He launched a campaign of damnatio memoriae, systematically destroying records, monuments, and names associated with Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children. Temples built to Aten were dismantled, statues defaced, and even Tutankhamun's name was struck from official list of kings. It was as if the Amun dynasty had never existed. Horem also restructured Egypt's government. Determined to prevent the chaos that had allowed figures like A to seize power, he reformed the legal system, placing authority back into the hands of the military and the priesthood. His reign, which lasted for nearly 3 decades, restored stability and strength to Egypt. He secured borders, revitalized temples, and re-established order after decades of upheaval. Yet his rise to power was built on the bones of the Amun family, whose memory he buried beneath stone in silence. The succession crisis following Tutankhamun's death reveals the ruthless nature of Egyptian politics. It was not blood alone that secured the throne, but cunning, marriage, and military strength. Akhenaten's tragic plea to the Hittites shows the desperation of a queen trapped in a collapsing dynasty. A's brief reign demonstrates the opportunism of those close to power, while Horem's eventual dominance illustrates how Egypt turned its back on the experiment of Aten and embraced a traditional order once more. In this struggle, the bloodline of the heretic king was extinguished. The children of Akhenaten and Nefertiti left no heirs. Their names were cursed, their monuments defaced, their history rewritten. The line of pharaohs that had dared to challenge Egypt's gods ended not with a glorious reign, but with betrayal, erasure, and silence. And yet, buried beneath this silence, their story endured, waiting for archaeologists thousands of years later to unearth it, piece by piece, from the sands of Amarna and the sealed tomb of Forgotten Boy. This was the true cause of Akhenaten's dream, a dynasty destroyed, a bloodline erased, and a kingdom that chose memory's destruction over remembrance. But even in erasure, mystery lingers. The ghosts of Akhenaten and Horem still whisper through history, telling us that dynasties do not die quietly. They are strangled, buried, and rewritten by those who survive them. There is a saying that the Egyptians built their monuments not for the living, but for eternity. Pharaohs carved their names into stone, raised towering obelisks, and filled temples with inscriptions so that even if their bodies perished, their memory would endure forever. To erase a name in Egypt was not merely vandalism, it was annihilation. To strike a king's image from stone was to murder him a second time, condemning his soul to wander in darkness for eternity. It was the most devastating punishment the state could inflict, and it was this fate that awaited the Amun bloodline. When Horem ascended the throne after he inherited more than a kingdom. He inherited the scars of a heresy that had torn Egypt apart. Akhenaten's worship of Aten had not only disrupted religion, it had destabilized the political order and alienated the powerful priesthood of Amun. For Egypt to heal, Horem needed not just to restore balance, but to obliterate all memory of the experiment that had nearly broken the kingdom. And so began one of the most thorough campaigns of damnatio memoriae in history. The process was relentless. Akhenaten's name was chiseled out of inscriptions wherever it appeared. Reliefs of him and Nefertiti were smashed, their faces obliterated with deliberate precision. The colossal statues at Karnak, once built to glorify Aten, were dismantled stone by stone, their fragments reused in later buildings, buried deep within the foundation so they would never again see light. The city of Amarna, Akhenaten's shining capital, was abandoned to the desert, its temples left to crumble into dust. Even Tutankhamun, though revered in his time as a restorer of the gods, was not spared. His name was omitted from official king lists compiled by later dynasties. In their place, scribes wrote of rulers who had never reigned, creating a seamless illusion that jumped from Amenhotep III directly to Horem. For centuries, it was as if Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and they had never existed. The bloodline of the Amarna kings was erased not only from Egypt's monuments, but from its very memory. Why was such erasure necessary? The answer lies in the power of memory itself. To Egyptians, names were sacred. To speak the name of the dead was to give them life again. By erasing a name, the priests of Amun and the rulers who followed ensured that the heretic dynasty could not return, even in spirit. The war against memory was as much spiritual as it was political. Egypt had to cleanse itself, not only in body but in soul. Yet, like all attempt to erase history, the destruction was imperfect. Traces of Akhenaten and his family survived in ways Horem could never have imagined. The ruins of Amarna, half buried beneath desert sands, preserve fragments of their lives, letters etched on clay tablets, murals still showing the royal family in intimate domestic scenes, statues broken but not destroyed. Tutankhamun's tomb, overlooked in the Valley of the Kings, escaped the looters and the hands of those who sought to erase him. Ironically, the very attempt to bury their memory so completely ensured that what little remained became all the more intriguing to later generations. The war against memory also carried another irony. While Akhenaten's name was cursed in Egypt, beyond its borders his legacy was recorded by others. The Amarna letters, a cache of diplomatic correspondence found in the ruins of his city, reveal how foreign rulers viewed him, sometimes with admiration, often with confusion, but always acknowledging his presence. These voices, written on clay and buried for millennia, preserve what the chisels of Egypt tried to destroy. Still, for over 3,000 years, the damnatio memoriae succeeded. Ancient scribes and later historians alike spoke little, if at all, of the Amarna kings. To the Egyptians of the New Kingdom and beyond, there were shadows best left unspoken, their heresy too dangerous to recall. Their faces vanished from temple walls, their names lost to ritual prayers. The once proud bloodline of Akhenaten and Nefertiti dissolved into silence. When modern archaeologists rediscovered their traces, the silence broke. It was as if the voices of the Amarna family whispered through the sand, demanding to be heard again. Their statues, their letters, their tombs, though scarred by erasure, reveal fragments of a story Egypt had tried to bury forever. The erasure itself became part of the mystery. Why had the priests and pharaohs been so desperate to destroy them? What secret was so dangerous that memory itself had to be killed? The answer may never be fully known, but the war against memory reveals something profound about the nature of power. In Egypt, power was not only about armies and monuments, but about controlling the story of history itself. To decide who was remembered and who was forgotten was to decide who truly lived forever. Horror may have thought he buried Akhenaten and his bloodline in oblivion, but memory is a stubborn thing. What is erased in one age can be rediscovered in another. Thus, the Amarna kings achieved a strange immortality, not in the way they intended, not as radiant gods worshipped for eternity, but as shadows resurrected by curiosity, pieced together from ruins and whispers. Their erasure only deepened the mystery, ensuring that when they were finally remembered, it would be with awe, intrigue, and endless questions. The war against memory had been meant to silence them forever. Instead, it transformed them into legends that would outlast even the greatest pharaohs who tried to destroy them. For while stone can be shattered and names can be chiseled away, the human desire to uncover what has been hidden ensures that no memory is ever truly lost. Beneath the relentless sun of the Egyptian desert lies a secret city, lost in memory for over 3 millennia. Amarna, the city built by Akhenaten in devotion to the sun disk Aten, was meant to be the center of a new world order, a shining testament to religious revolution, political ambition, and artistic innovation. Today, it is little more than a scattering of ruins, crumbled mud brick walls, and fragments of painted plaster. Yet beneath this desolate surface, archaeologists have uncovered a city alive with history, intrigue, and the echoes of a bloodline that dared to defy Egypt itself. Akhenaten's vision for Amarna was radical. He broke from Thebes, abandoning the temples of Amun, and carved a new city out of virgin desert, where the sun reigned supreme. Streets were laid out in deliberate order, lined with palaces, administrative buildings, and temples bathed in sunlight. Frescoes depicted Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children in intimate domestic scenes, a revolutionary departure from the rigid, ceremonial depictions of earlier kings. The city was more than a capital. It was an experiment, a living monument to the power of one family and their devotion to Aten. Yet Amarna's very creation sowed the seeds of its downfall. Building a city in the desert required enormous resources and labor, straining the kingdom. The relocation angered powerful priests and traditionalists, creating a political rift that would haunt the Amarna family for generations. Even as Akhenaten constructed his sunlit utopia, enemies plotted quietly in the shadows. The city, magnificent though it was, became both sanctuary and prison for the bloodline that ruled it. The excavation of Amarna has revealed astonishing details about life in this forgotten city. Streets show signs of bustling markets, workshops, and homes, while tombs outside the city walls tell of the elite families who lived there. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of children's toys, domestic items, and inscriptions carved in haste by scribes chronicling births, deaths, and royal decrees. These fragments paint a vivid picture. This was not merely a city of gods and kings, but a city of people, children playing in courtyards, servants running errands, mothers grieving losses, and rulers desperately trying to secure their legacy. Among the most intriguing discoveries are the tombs of the royal family. While Akhenaten's own tomb was modest and hastily constructed, it contained traces of ritual objects and inscriptions hinting at an unbroken devotion to Aten. The tombs of lesser-known family members, including potential children, remain partially explored. KV-55, KV-62, and KV-63 all offer tantalizing glimpses into families' lives and deaths, suggesting that the Amarna bloodline was far more complex and fragile than history initially recorded. Amarna also reveals the human cost of the Amarna experiment. Evidence of malnutrition, disease, and premature death has been found in the city's burial sites. The royal children were not spared. Some died in infancy, others in early childhood. Archaeologists speculate that the combination of genetic intermarriage, a harsh desert environment, and the immense political pressures contributed to these tragedies. The city, designed to glorify a divine family, was also a crucible of human suffering. Yet even in ruins, the city tells stories of resilience and artistry. Frescoes in partial colors depict Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their 6 daughters, playing games, offering prayers, and sharing family moments. These images humanize a family that has often been reduced to myth and speculation. They show joy, love, and tenderness, moment preserved against the odds, surviving destruction and deliberate erasure. In these images, The bloodline of the pharaohs speaks to us across time, reminding us that they were flesh and blood, not just legends. Amarna's architecture itself is a testament to innovation. Temples were built open to the sky, bathing in sunlight, a radical departure from enclosed sanctuaries. Streets aligned with celestial bodies, linking urban design with the cosmic order. Even the humble houses reflect thoughtful planning, with central courtyards for air and light. The city was a reflection of Akhenaten's vision, a tangible, living manifestation of a dynasty's ambition and its connection to the divine. But as remarkable as Amarna was, it was doomed. Akhenaten's death, the disappearance of Nefertiti, and the fragile life of Tutankhamun all contributed to its abandonment. Horem, upon seizing the throne, ordered the city to be deserted. Palaces were stripped of valuables, temples dismantled, and bricks reused elsewhere. Within a generation, the desert claimed Amarna, leaving only traces of its grandeur beneath the shifting sands. Modern archaeology has slowly resurrected the city. The work of Flinders Petrie, Ludwig Borchardt, and later teams uncovered palace foundations, temples, and tombs. Excavations revealed inscriptions that survived Horem's erasures, letters detailing daily life, and artistic fragments showcasing a unique style that emphasized naturalism and human emotion. Every discovery has illuminated the lives of the Amarna family, revealing both their brilliance and the vulnerabilities that plagued their bloodline. Amarna is more than a historical site. It is a narrative frozen in time. It tells a story of ambition and hubris, devotion and tragedy, life and death. Through its ruins, we glimpse the fleeting nature of power, the fragility of human plans, and the enduring resonance of memory. The city was meant to immortalize a family and its revolutionary faith, but it also serves as a warning. Even the most magnificent creations can be erased, yet fragments endure, speaking across centuries to anyone willing to listen. The forgotten city stands as a monument to both creation and destruction, a mirror reflecting the complex legacy of the Amarna bloodline. Within its walls, the hopes, dreams, and fears of a heretic king, a vanished queen, and children too fragile to survive are etched into stone and plaster. Amarna whispers to us still, urging us to remember, to question, and to wonder. In the sands of the desert, Amarna sleeps, waiting for the curious, the diligent, and the bold to uncover its secrets. Each fragment of pottery, each faded mural, each buried tomb tells a story that was nearly lost. And yet, through excavation and research, the forgotten city of Amarna lives again, allowing the world to witness the brilliance and fragility of a dynasty that dared to defy tradition, only to vanish under the weight of history. The story of Akhenaten's bloodline is not simply one of kings and queens, monuments and erasures. It is a story of children, fragile, forgotten, and often hidden from history. While Tutankhamun stands as the most famous of Akhenaten's descendants, he was not alone. Evidence suggests that the heretic pharaoh fathered multiple children, many of whom perish in infancy or vanish from records, victims of disease, genetic fragility, and the brutal politics of the time. To uncover their stories is to glimpse the hidden heart of a dynasty doomed from the start. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's 6 daughters are central to this mystery. Meritaten, Meketaten, and Ksenpaten, Neferneferuaten Tasheret, Neferneferu, and Setapenre. Their names echo faintly through the ruins of Amarna, carved in stone, yet their lives remain largely shrouded. Meritaten, the eldest, may have married Smenkhkare, the shadowy pharaoh who possibly ruled briefly after Akhenaten's death, though the evidence is disputed. Meketaten died young, perhaps in childbirth, her tomb in the royal city of Amarna containing a depiction of a funeral rites that hints at a mysterious and tragic end. Even the daughters who survived into their teens face a perilous existence. Life in Amarna was demanding, especially for royal children. They were expected to participate in religious ceremonies, attend court functions, and be symbols of divine order, all while growing up in an environment fraught with political tension. Tutankhamun himself may have been an exception, surviving long enough to become king, but the rest of Akhenaten's children were not so fortunate. Many succumbed to illness, malnutrition, or the consequences of intermarriage within the royal family. Yet some of these children may have been deliberately hidden or erased from records. The erasure of Nefertiti and her family by Horem's restoration campaign likely extended to princesses. Tombs show incomplete inscriptions, statues of girls left unfinished, and murals painted over with generic figures. It is as though the scribes, acting under royal orders, attempted to remove these children from memory alongside their parents. They were casualties of a war against history itself, erased not by nature but by human design. One of the most enigmatic figures is Nefertiti Tasheret. Her name appears briefly in inscriptions alongside her sisters, yet her ultimate fate is unknown. Some scholars speculate she may have survived into adulthood, perhaps marrying within the royal court, while others believe she died young, leaving no trace beyond her name etched into a few monuments. This uncertainty mirrors a larger fate of the Amun children, lives lived in shadows, fragments of existence that survived only in partial records. Even Tutankhamun's stillborn daughters illustrate the fragility of the bloodline. Found within his tomb, their tiny bodies tell a story of inherited weakness, the genetic toll of generations of close-kin marriages. The deaths of these children were not mere accidents. They were a biological consequence of the royal obsession with purity. Each child who perished weakened the line further, leaving Egypt's throne vulnerable to outsiders and opportunists. The hidden heirs also highlight the political stakes of Akhenaten's revolution. By breaking with the traditional pantheon and establishing a new capital, Akhenaten created both a religious and dynastic experiment. His children were heirs not only to a throne but to a radical vision that many in Egypt rejected. Their survival was never guaranteed. They were pawns in a game of divine legitimacy, expected to embody the Aten faith while navigating a world that increasingly sought to destroy them. Amun's ruins hint at their lives in subtle ways. Small statues of children at play, toys found in the homes of nobles, and sketches in palace walls suggest moments of normalcy amidst the turbulence. The royal daughters may have laughed, played, and formed bonds, yet every moment of life was overshadowed by the pressures of survival and the weight of history. These fragments allow us to see them not merely as victims of erasure, but as real children, fragile, loved, and tragically impermanent. Some evidence suggests that the bloodline may have extended beyond the well-known children. Tomb KV-55, discovered in the Valley of the Kings, contains remains of a male who could be Akhenaten's son or brother, though his exact identity remains contested. DNA studies indicate close familial links to Tutankhamun, hinting at a web of hidden heirs whose names were lost or deliberately concealed. These findings underscore how complex and perilous the survival of the Amun bloodline truly was. The story of the hidden heirs is also a reminder of how power shapes history. The children of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were born into privilege, yet that privilege came with profound vulnerability. Their fate was determined not only by nature and genetics, but by the political ambitions of others. Horem and the Priests of Amun had stakes in the children's survival or demise. Each life was a potential threat, a claim to the throne, a reminder of the heretical past. In erasing them, the Restoration rulers attempted to cleanse Egypt's memory. Yet paradoxically, this very erasure made the discovery of their existence centuries later all the more compelling. In the end, the hidden heirs of Akhenaten and Nefertiti embody the tragedy of the Amun experiment. Their lives were fragile, their deaths frequent, their memory nearly obliterated. And yet, through careful archaeology, DNA analysis, and the study of Amun's ruins, we can piece together their story, a story of resilience, fragility, and human stakes that echo across millennia. These children, once nearly forgotten, now speak to us of love, ambition, and the fragility of dynasties. The Amun children remind us that history is not solely the story of kings and wars. It is also the story of those who lived in the shadows, whose lives were shaped by forces far greater than themselves. They were the hidden heirs, the silent witnesses to a dynasty's rise and fall, the fragile threads of a bloodline that almost vanished completely. And yet, through ruins, mummies, and artifacts, they endure, whispering to us across time. Though lost in life, in death and memory, these children continue to shape our understanding of Egypt's most radical dynasty. They are the secret heart of the Amun bloodline, the evidence that even in eras dominated by kings and gods, the smallest lives hold stories that echo through eternity. The bloodline of the Amun pharaohs is as fascinating as it is tragic. Beneath the gilded masks, towering monuments, and revolutionary ideology lies a story written in DNA, a story of inherited fragility, hidden disease, and the consequences of generations of close-kin marriage. For Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their descendants, the pursuit of pure royal blood came at a cost that would ultimately shape the destiny of Egypt itself. Their bodies, in life and death, tell a tale that stone and inscriptions alone could not. Modern genetic testing has unveiled startling truths about the Amun lineage. Studies on Tutankhamun's mummy revealed he was a product of a brother-sister union, a common practice among Egyptian royalty, intended to preserve the sanctity of the divine bloodline. Yet nature exacted a harsh toll. Tutankhamun's deformities, clubfoot, scoliosis, and fused vertebrae suggest the consequences of inherited recessive disorders. His fragile body, coupled with disease, highlights the biological fragility of a dynasty obsessed with purity over health. But Tutankhamun was not unique. Analysis of other mummies believed to be Nefertiti's children or relatives shows evidence of congenital deformities, bone malformations, and premature deaths. The bloodline, intended to glorify the gods on earth, instead became a record of genetic vulnerability. Even those who survived infancy, like Tutankhamun himself, were physically compromised, reliant on canes, prone to illness, and ultimately unable to sustain their lineage. The implications extend beyond mere health. In a society where the pharaoh was expected to embody divine perfection, physical frailty could undermine authority. Akhenaten himself exhibited unusual features in art: elongated skull, narrow shoulders, swollen thighs, sparking centuries of debate among historians. Were these stylistic choices, symbolic depictions, or the manifestations of real genetic conditions? Some scholars suggest that the pharaoh may have suffered from Marfan syndrome or a similar hereditary disorder, reflecting the hidden toll of royal intermarriage. These genetic shadows cast a long influence over the fate of Egypt's royal line. Tutankhamun's stillborn daughters, the premature deaths of Akhenaten and other princesses, and the apparent absence of surviving male heirs underscore how the dynasty faltered from within. Power, wealth, and divine sanction could not protect the children from inherited fragility. Each generation grew weaker, each successive life more vulnerable, until the once proud bloodline teetered on the brink of extinction. The biological reality intersected tragically with politics. The frailty of Akhenaten's descendants made them easy targets in a volatile court. When Tutankhamun died, his physical vulnerabilities were compounded by a lack of surviving heirs, leaving the throne open to opportunists like A and Horem. The same genetic patterns that weakened the family physically also weakened their political security, ensuring that the dynasty's enemies would have both the motive and the opportunity to erase them. This interplay of genetics and politics also adds nuance to the fate of the Amun princesses. The daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were not merely pawns. Their survival, or lack thereof, determined the continuity of the heretic line. Each death diminished the dynasty's strength, each stillborn child a reminder that purity came at a cost. Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's widow and half-sister, also bore the weight of this genetic legacy. Her desperate appeal to the Hittites for a foreign husband underscores the fragility not only of her own line, but of Egypt's succession itself. Even Nefertiti may have been affected. While less is known about her health, the family's genetic history suggests that she likely carried the same inherited risks as her children. Her disappearance, whether through death or transformation into pharaoh, also served to obscure the human cost of this bloodline. Behind the beauty, the power, and the revolutionary ideology lay a silent, biological struggle that shaped every decision, every marriage, every succession crisis. Yet there is a paradox in these shadows. The very pursuit of genetic purity, intended to preserve the family's divine essence, ensured that the dynasty could not endure. Egypt, with its monumental architecture and powerful priests, could erase names and deface statues, but it could not rewrite DNA. The fragility encoded in the Amun line determined it collapsed long before the swords and chisels of Horem intervened. Modern science allows us to reconstruct the dynasty in ways unimaginable to ancient Egyptians. DNA analysis, CT scans, and forensic studies reveal the intimate vulnerabilities of those once worshipped as gods. Each fracture, deformity, and trace of disease tells a story of survival, of the human cost behind the gilded facade. These genetic shadows illuminate why the Amun line ended so abruptly, why Tutankhamun was the last of his kind, and why history sought to erase what nature had already imperiled. But these shadows also humanize them. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and their children were not invincible icons. They were humans subject to the same biological laws that govern all life. Their struggles with illness, deformity, and premature death invite empathy, a deeper understanding of the pressures and vulnerabilities of royal life. They were children, spouses, and rulers, navigating a world where perfection was demanded but impossible to achieve. The story of genetic fragility also casts new light on historical mysteries. Was Tutankhamun's premature death simply the result of accident, disease, or political intrigue, or a combination intensified by inherited weakness? Did the deaths of other children shape the urgency with which and Horus maneuvered for power? These questions bridge science and history, revealing the invisible threads that connect biology to empire, heredity to legacy. In the end, the legacy of incest and fragility in the Amun bloodline is both cautionary and compelling. It shows how ambition and devotion, when coupled with genetic isolation, can undermine even the most powerful families. It reminds us that behind the grandeur of temples and monuments lies a human story of vulnerability, loss, and resilience. The bloodline that sought to be divine was, in truth, profoundly mortal. These genetic shadows endure in mummies, tombs, and artifacts, silently narrating a tale of ambition, love, and tragedy. They remind us that the pharaohs were not infallible gods, but humans whose decisions, desires, and biology shaped the course of history. And through science and archaeology, we can witness the intimate fragility of a family that defied tradition, only to be undone by the very bonds meant to preserve it. The Amun bloodline's final lesson is clear. The pursuit of perfection, in life or legacy, carries hidden costs. In their quest to secure divinity through blood, Akhenaten and Nefertiti ensured both brilliance and vulnerability. Their children, Tutankhamun, and the hidden A's bear the imprint of this delicate balance, a reminder that even the most powerful dynasties are ultimately subject to the laws of nature. In the heart of the Valley of the Kings, nestled among grand tombs and hidden passages, lies the most famous burial of ancient Egypt, the tomb of Tutankhamun. Yet this tomb, celebrated today as a pinnacle of archaeological discovery, was never intended to be the eternal resting place of Egypt's most renowned pharaoh. It was small, modest, and hurriedly prepared, an accidental time capsule that preserved the boy king, his treasures, and the secrets of a dynasty the world had nearly forgotten. Howard Carter's 1922 discovery stunned the world. Beneath the rubble and sand, untouched by thieves for over 3,000 years, lay a tomb brimming with golden splendor. From the iconic death mask to chariots, jewelry, and shrines, the treasures of Tutankhamun captivated imaginations and reshaped understanding of ancient Egypt. Yet beyond the opulence, Carter and his team uncovered something far more telling, a story of urgency, fragility, and political expedience etched into every corner of the tomb. The tomb's small size immediately puzzled scholars. Compared to the grandiose tombs of pharaohs like Ramses II or Seti I, Tutankhamun's resting place seemed almost unworthy of a king. Archaeologists surmise that Tutankhamun's unexpected death necessitated a hasty burial. Preparations were rushed, and many items placed in the tomb appeared to have been repurposed from other burials. Furniture, shrines, and even coffins were reworked, their original owners now forgotten. The boy king's tomb was a practical solution in a crisis, a palace of afterlife made from fragments of the past. Inside, the arrangement of treasures reflects both reverence and urgency. Nested coffins, golden chariots, ceremonial weapons, and hundreds of personal items fill every chamber. Yet the placement is sometimes chaotic, with objects hastily stacked or shifted. Inscriptions on the walls, though ornate, include hurried repairs and corrections, suggesting a team racing against time. Every artifact is a testament not just to Tutankhamun's status, but to the fragility of a dynasty abruptly ended in the desperate attempt to honor it. The tomb also preserves intimate glimpses of the boy king's life. Jewelry inscribed with his names, miniature statues of gods, and even dolls and toys provide evidence of Tutankhamun's youth. Despite being a ruler, he remained a child at heart, surrounded in death by the symbols of play and protection. These objects humanize a figure often reduced to myth, reminding us that this was a living, fragile boy whose reign was cut tragically short. Hastiness aside, the tomb inadvertently became the perfect vessel for preservation. Its small size, location, and the rubble that concealed it from tomb robbers ensured that Tutankhamun's treasures remained intact. While grander tombs were plundered and destroyed, this modest chamber survived largely untouched. Ironically, it was a lack of ambition, the accidental simplicity, and the urgency of his burial that safeguarded a treasure trove of history. The discovery of the tomb also shed light on the Amun bloodline. Inside were artifacts reflecting the religious restoration begun by Tutankhamun, including depictions of Amun, as well as traces of Akhenaten's influence. The tomb preserved subtle reminders of a heretic lineage, buried and almost erased but now revealed in vivid detail. Tutankhamun's final resting place is a window into the transition between radical revolution and traditional restoration, a moment frozen in gold and plaster. The physical state of Tutankhamun's mummy adds further intrigue. Studies reveal a body riddled with disease, deformities, and injuries, some possibly inflicted in the final moments of life or during burial rituals. The discovery raises questions about the boy king's death, accident, illness, or murder. Every fracture, every mark on his remains hints at stories that have long been lost to history, yet preserved here by chance. The tomb, in its modesty, became a repository not only of treasures but of mystery. Even the treasures themselves tell a story of urgency and adaptation. Some items were hastily crafted or altered to suit Tutankhamun's burial, demonstrating a blend of traditional craftsmanship and improvised solutions. This includes reworked coffins, shrines built from salvaged materials, and objects initially intended for other royals. Each artifact is a palimpsest, layered with history, reflecting both the continuity and disruption of Egypt's royal traditions. The tomb also contains a ghost of political intrigue. Tutankhamun's sudden death left the Amun line vulnerable, and the hurried burial may have been as much a matter of political expediency as ritual propriety. By securing the boy king in a hidden tomb, officials may have aimed to protect him from enemies, maintain order, and stabilize succession. Every object, every chamber, every placement carries echoes of a kingdom on edge, racing against time to honor a king who had been too young to secure his legacy. Moreover, Tutankhamun's tomb exemplifies the tension between permanence and fragility in ancient Egypt. While the monuments and tombs of past pharaohs sought to immortalize, they often failed to withstand looters, natural decay, or political erasure. In this accidental, modest chamber, survival was achieved not by design but by circumstance. It is a reminder that history is fragile, that the fates of dynasties and their artifacts often hinge on chance as much as intention. The discovery of the tomb also transformed modern perceptions of ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun became the emblem of pharaonic mystique, inspiring fascination with the human, the divine, and the tragic. Yet beyond fame, the tomb provides an unparalleled record of life, death, and burial practices during a turbulent era. It allows scholars to reconstruct the final days of a boy king, the religious shifts of his time, and the fragile continuity of a bloodline nearly erased. In essence, Tutankhamun's tomb is a time capsule, accidental, chaotic, and yet perfectly preserved. It holds a story of a boy king who should not have lived, whose dynasty was fragile, and whose reign ended abruptly. It preserves the relics of a vanished bloodline, the influence of heretic kings, and the traces of political and religious upheaval. Every gold mask, every miniature throne, every shattered fragment of pottery whispers secrets of ambition, fragility, and survival. For over 3,000 years, the tomb remained hidden beneath rubble and sand, untouched by human hands. When it was finally opened, it revealed not just treasures, but the intimate, human story of Tutankhamun, his life, his death, and the extraordinary circumstances that allowed him to be remembered when so many of his family were erased. The tomb's very modesty, once a seeming weakness, became its greatest strength, ensuring that the story of the Amun bloodline could survive to captivate the modern world. In the end, Tutankhamun's tomb is more than a burial place. It is a testament to chance, preservation, and history itself. It is a mirror of a fragile dynasty, a treasure trove of human and political drama, and a portal into a world where kings were mortal, children were vulnerable, and memory could be both erased and preserved in the sands of time. Tutankhamun's sudden death at around 18 years old has captivated historians, archaeologists, and the public for nearly a century. The Boy King, celebrated for restoring Egypt's traditional religion and undoing the radical reforms of Akhenaten, should have been on the cusp of a long and illustrious reign. Instead, he died unexpectedly, leaving the throne vulnerable and fueling speculation that persists to this day. Was his death a simple accident, a consequence of fragile genetics, or the result of a sinister conspiracy? Within the tomb, clues and shadows converge, blurring the line between history and legend. For centuries, Egyptian lore warned that tombs were places of danger. Tales of curses and divine retribution were common, meant to protect the deceased from desecration. When Howard Carter unearthed Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, these stories resurfaced with sensational headlines. Newspapers proclaimed that a pharaoh's curse had claimed lives, pointing to the deaths of Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron, and others associated with the excavation. While modern science dismisses supernatural claims, the cultural resonance of curses speaks to the fear and reverence surrounding Egypt's royal dead. Yet the mystery of Tutankhamun's death is not purely legend. Archaeological and forensic evidence suggests multiple possibilities. CT scans reveal a fractured skull, which may have resulted from an accident, possibly a chariot crash, as Tutankhamun was known to enjoy riding and hunting. Combined with his weakened immune system and congenital disorders, products of generations of royal intermarriage, even a minor injury could have proved fatal. His body bears the marks of illness, trauma, and a weakened constitution, indicating that nature alone may have claimed the young pharaoh. However, the political context cannot be ignored. Tutankhamun's death created an immediate power vacuum, placing Egypt in a precarious position. The aging vizier quickly assumed authority, marrying Akhenaten to solidify his claim. Later, Horem would erase traces of the Amun lineage to consolidate power. The timing of Tutankhamun's death, combined with his genetic fragility, raises questions about whether human hands may have been involved. Was his demise truly accidental, or the result of palace intrigue aimed at ending a tenuous bloodline? The sudden disappearance of his stillborn daughters, the ambiguous deaths of his siblings, and the marginalization of other potential heirs add to the intrigue. These patterns suggest a dynasty under siege, not only from external political forces but from internal vulnerability. The Amun bloodline, already weakened by inherited disorders, was further destabilized by the boy king's premature death, leaving Egypt ripe for opportunistic rulers. Tutankhamun's tomb, hastily prepared, may itself be evidence of this tension, a reflection of urgency and uncertainty surrounding the young king's demise. Speculation about conspiracies also touches upon the role of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's widow. At barely 18, she was suddenly thrust into a position of immense political and emotional pressure. Her appeal to the Hittite king for a foreign husband demonstrates both desperation and political acumen, hinting at a court rife with danger and intrigue. Whether she acted as a pawn, a survivor, or an agent in potential plots remains unknown, but her actions underscore the precariousness of Tutankhamun's final years. In addition, forensic studies suggest that Tutankhamun may have suffered from malaria, bone necrosis, or other infections that would have made him vulnerable to sudden death. Combined with genetic disorders, a clubfoot, a cleft palate, and other congenital conditions, the young pharaoh's body was an unstable vessel for kingship. Even without foul play, the combination of biology and accident could have easily resulted in his untimely passing. The tension between myth and science fuels the enduring fascination with Tutankhamun's death. The so-called curse adds drama and mystique, while modern forensic analysis provides tangible explanations. The fractured skull, evidence of malaria, and inherited deformities offer plausible, human-centered reason for his demise. Yet the palace intrigues, sudden succession shifts, and the swift consolidation of power by and Horem ensure that suspicion never fully dissipates. The overlap of biology, politics, and rumor creates a perfect storm for legend. Tutankhamun's death also illuminates the broader consequences of the Amun experiment. The heretic dynasty, already destabilized by religious and political upheaval, faced existential threats from within its own bloodline. Fragile genetics, high child mortality, and a lack of surviving heirs meant that the dynasty's collapse was almost inevitable. Tutankhamun's sudden death accelerated this process, leaving Egypt's throne vulnerable to those eager to restore order, even at the cost of erasing his family's memory. The boy king's tomb, discovered nearly 3 millennia later, became both a repository of history and a spark for myth. Each artifact, each inscription, and each fragment of treasure serves as a silent witness to the circumstances surrounding his death. The horrid arrangements, repurposed coffins, and modest scale of the burial reveal a kingdom grappling with crisis, while the preservation of the tomb allows modern observers to piece together the final chapter of a fragile dynasty. Even today, Tutankhamun's death sparks debate. Scholars and enthusiasts analyze every detail, the placement of objects, skeletal injuries, inscriptions, and even the toxic fungi in the tomb to reconstruct the boy king's final days. The combination of genetics, politics, and chance paints a complex portrait, one in which a young ruler, brilliant and beloved, was at the mercy of biology, fortune, and human ambition. The mystery endures because it cannot be neatly resolved. Each new study adds another layer to a story already steeped in intrigue. Ultimately, the death of Tutankhamun is emblematic of the Amun bloodline itself, brilliant, fragile, and vulnerable to forces both natural and human. It underscores the intersection of biology, politics, and history, revealing how a dynasty devoted to radical change was undone not only by external pressures, but by its own internal vulnerabilities. The boy king's passing left Egypt at a crossroads, his tomb a silent witness to a world poised between innovation and tradition, heresy and restoration, life and death. The myths of curses, conspiracies, and divine retribution persist because they capture the imagination and echo the uncertainties of history. They remind us that in ancient Egypt, life and death, power and fragility, memory and erasure were intertwined. Tutankhamun's story, his life, his death, and the mystery surrounding them, embodies a tension between legend and reality, a tension that continues to captivate the world nearly a century after his tomb was first opened. Through forensic science, archaeology, and careful study, the truth of Tutankhamun's death emerges as both human and extraordinary, a boy king claimed by fragile genetics, disease, and the pressures of a dynasty on the brink of collapse. Yet the whispers of conspiracy, palace intrigue, and the pharaoh's supposed curse ensure that his death remains one of history's most compelling enigmas. The young king, whose bloodline was almost erased, continues to captivate, reminding us that even in death, the pharaohs speak. The end of the Amun dynasty was marked not only by death and fragility, but by deliberate erasure. With Tutankhamun gone, two powerful figures stepped into the shadows of history to secure Egypt's future: the aging vizier, and Horem, the military commander turned pharaoh. Their rise to power was not merely political. It was a calculated campaign to obliterate the memory of Akhenaten's heretic line, ensuring that the revolutionary bloodline would vanish from both throne and temple. They were the final erasers, rewriting history with chisel and decree. Once a trusted advisor to Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, moved swiftly to consolidate power. Marrying Tutankhamun's widow, Akhenaten, he positioned himself as a legitimate successor, maintaining continuity while suppressing rivals. Yete's reign was short, lasting only 4 years, and he faced immense pressure to restore Egypt's traditional order. He oversaw the removal of Aten's symbols, the rededication of temples to Amun, and the subtle suppression of Amun's legacy. A's erasure was surgical, subtle enough to avoid upheaval, thorough enough to protect the restored religious hierarchy. Horem's approach was far more comprehensive. A former general, he ascended after and embarked on a systematic campaign to erase the Amun bloodline from memory. Names were chiseled from monuments, statues smashed or defaced, and inscriptions rewritten to remove traces of heretical kings. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and even Tutankhamun, once revered, were consigned to oblivion. Horem's zeal was unmatched. In his eyes, the heresy of Atenism threatened the very soul of Egypt, and only total erasure could restore balance. The consequences of their actions were profound. By erasing the Amun lineage, and Horem effectively rewrote history. Official king lists omitted the heretic pharaohs, creating a narrative that flowed directly from Amenhotep III to Horem. Generations of Egyptians would grow up unaware that Akhenaten had ever existed, and the revolutionary city of Amun would be abandoned to the desert. The erasure was not just political. It was spiritual, a war on memory itself, designed to sever Egypt's connection to a dangerous and controversial bloodline. Yet this campaign of obliteration was imperfect. Horem's chisels could destroy names and faces, but they could not erase every trace. Ruins of Amun remained. Letters and clay tablets survived, and tombs in the Valley of the Kings contained subtle remnants of the heretic line. Even the mummified remains of Tutankhamun and relatives resisted complete erasure. Ironically, the thoroughness of Horem's campaign created a puzzle for future generations, compelling archaeologists and historians to reconstruct a narrative that had been deliberately fragmented. Horem's motivations were both ideological and pragmatic. He sought to restore Egypt's religious and political order, strengthen the authority of the Priests of Amun, and prevent further instability. The Amun kings had represented not only a religious deviation, but a potential threat to the established hierarchy. By erasing their memory, Horem aimed to protect the state, consolidating power under a pharaoh who could be presented as a restorer and unifier. It was a calculated move, one that combined piety, politics, and paranoia. Horem's actions also illuminate the fragility of dynastic succession. The Amun bloodline had been weakened by genetics, disease, and early deaths, leaving few viable heirs. Tutankhamun's untimely death, coupled with the deaths of other children, created a vacuum that required intervention. Horem's erasure of the lineage was not only ideological, it was practical. Without living heirs capable of ruling, the memory of a fragile bloodline posed both political risk and potential rebellion. The techniques of erasure were meticulous. Inscriptions on temples, stelae, and tombs were altered, often leaving faint traces that modern archaeologists can still detect. Statues were smashed or recarved, sometimes reproposed for new rulers. Even in the Valley of the Kings, tombs were modified to reflect the new official narrative, removing references to Aten and reinstating Amun. Every act of destruction carried symbolism, a kingdom reclaiming its identity by obliterating the memory of those who challenged it. Yet Horem's campaign also reveals a strange respect for history, paradoxically. While erasure was thorough, it was never entirely indiscriminate. Important state records, legal documents, and administrative materials often survive, albeit stripped of names. In this sense, Horem preserved the skeleton of Egypt's history while excising the flesh of the Amarna experiment. The act of erasure was as much about control as it was about destruction, shaping collective memory without collapsing the machinery of the state. The actions of Horem had lasting consequences for how we understand the Amarna period. For centuries, scholars believed that Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children had been minor or even mythical figures. Only through archaeology, forensic science, and careful study of surviving artifacts could the reality of the heretic dynasty be reconstructed. The campaign of erasure, intended to make them disappear, paradoxically ensured that their eventual rediscovery would captivate the modern imagination. The shadows Horem cast only deepened the mystery. Furthermore, the final erasure illuminates the human cost of political consolidation. The children of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and other family members were not only victims of genetics and disease but of deliberate suppression. Tombs left unfinished, inscriptions chiseled away, and statues defaced all testified to a calculated effort to obliterate identity. Memory, once thought inviolable, was subject to the whims of rulers. The Amarna bloodline, for all its brilliance and tragedy, became a casualty of power, a lesson in the impermanence of legacy. Even today, the remnants of Horem's campaign speak volumes. Archaeologists uncover faint traces of erased names, fragments of sculptures, and the skeletal remains of mummies that survived official attempts at destruction. These remnants allow modern observers to reconstruct a story deliberately obscured for generations. In this way, the work of Horem inadvertently set the stage for fascination, discovery, and scholarship, ensuring that the Amarna bloodline would ultimately endure in memory, if not in monuments. In the end, Horem were both restorers and erasers, architect of a version of history that sought to protect Egypt but at the cost of silencing a revolutionary dynasty. Their actions remind us that power is not only expressed through conquest of governance but through control of memory itself. By rewriting the past, they shape perceptions of kings, gods, and dynasties for centuries, demonstrating the immense influence rulers wield over both life and legacy. The final erasure of the Amarna line underscores a recurring theme, that history is a fragile construct, subject to both human ambition and chance. While monuments can be destroyed and names erased, traces endure in ruins, artifacts, and the sands of time. Horem may have believed they had obliterated Akhenaten and his descendants, yet the legacy of the heretic pharaohs continues to intrigue, puzzle, and captivate the modern world. Through their actions, we see the intersection of power, fear, and memory. Tutankhamun's death, the fragility of the bloodline, and the political motives of Horem converge to create a story of ambition, destruction, and unintended immortality. The dynasty they sought to erase remains, paradoxically, more compelling because of their efforts. Their chisels may have defaced stone, but they could not erase curiosity, discovery, or the enduring human desire to uncover what has been hidden. Centuries after the Amarna bloodline was systematically erased, the sands of Egypt began to yield their long-hidden secrets. Modern archaeology, armed with advanced tools and forensic techniques, has resurrected stories that were thought lost forever. From the ruins of Amarna to the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, researchers have painstakingly pieced together fragments of a dynasty erased by politics, disease, and time, revealing a story that is as fascinating as it is tragic. The rediscovery began in earnest with the meticulous work of early 20th century archaeologists. Howard Carter's 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was only the beginning. While Carter uncovered treasures of gold and artifacts that dazzled the world, later generations of archaeologists turned their attention to the broader Amarna period. Sites previously considered barren or insignificant suddenly revealed connections to Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children. Every pottery shard, fragment of fresco, and crumbling mud brick provided clues about a dynasty once deemed heretical and forgotten. Amarna, the city Akhenaten built as a testament to the worship of Aten, became a focal point of this rediscovery. Excavations uncovered palaces, administrative buildings, and temples that had been buried under centuries of sand and neglect. Frescoes depicting royal family life, previously obscured by erosion or deliberate defacement, offered unprecedented insight into the personal lives of the pharaohs. Scenes of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children, once considered symbolic, began to reveal human moments, laughter, grief, domestic ritual. These images humanize a dynasty long demonized or ignored in official records. Modern archaeology also employed technology that early explorers could only dream of. Ground-penetrating radar, infrared imaging, and 3D reconstruction allowed researchers to detect buried structures, map tombs, and reconstruct scenes with extraordinary accuracy. Even traces of inscriptions erased by Horem's chisels became legible under specialized lighting, exposing names, titles, and events that were meant to vanish. Through these tools, the heretic pharaohs and their hidden heirs slowly re-emerged from the shadows of history. One of the most remarkable aspects of this rediscovery is the use of DNA and forensic science. Genetic analysis of mummies, including Tutankhamun, KV-55, and related individuals, confirmed familial relationships and revealed inherited disorders that had long been speculated upon. These studies corroborated historical records, clarified mysteries surrounding premature deaths, and provided concrete evidence of the biological fragility of the Amarna bloodline. For the first time, science illuminated what the ancient Egyptians themselves could not record, the intimate realities of life, death, and inheritance within a fragile dynasty. The tombs themselves also yielded secrets beyond the expected treasures. KV-55, long shrouded in debate, contains remains that may belong to Akhenaten or another close relative, their identities obscured by centuries of political manipulation. KV-62, Tutankhamun's tomb, offers both spectacle and evidence of horrid burials, reproposed coffins, and altered inscriptions. KV-63, discovered more recently, hints at additional royal family members, perhaps stillborn or hastily interred, whose lives were erased in death. Each tomb is a time capsule, preserving not only artifact but the echoes of human vulnerability, ambition, and secrecy. The rediscovery also reveals subtleties in art and architecture that reflect the dynasty's unique ideology. Akhenaten's elongated statues, intimate frescoes, and open-air temples at Amarna demonstrate a deliberate break from traditional Egyptian norms. These innovations were initially controversial and later erased, but archaeology has restored their significance. By studying these materials, researchers can reconstruct the philosophical and religious convictions of a family who sought to reshape Egypt, even as their revolution ultimately failed. Interestingly, modern rediscovery has also illuminated the lives of the lesser-known children of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Small statues, inscriptions, and burial artifacts reveal details about their existence, their roles within the royal household, and the tragedies that befell them. Through these findings, we glimpse the human cause of political ambition and religious upheaval, infants and children struggling for survival, royal women navigating power and peril, and a family whose brilliance was inseparable from fragility. Even the physical environment has contributed to rediscovery. The shifting desert, once an eraser of memory, has also preserved delicate items buried beneath the sand. Mud brick walls, once thought lost, reveal layouts of homes, streets, and temples. Organic materials, pottery, and even traces of food and clothing survived, offering insight into daily life. Through careful excavation and preservation, archaeologists reconstruct a world once nearly obliterated by time, politics, and cultural restoration. The rediscovery of the Amun period is not purely academic. It has captured public imagination, influencing literature, film, and popular understanding of ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun became a symbol of youth, vulnerability, and the intersection of fame and fragility. Akhenaten and Nefertiti transformed from footnotes in history into figures of revolutionary vision, tragic brilliance, and mysterious disappearance. The hidden A's, once erased, now speak through artifacts and genetic evidence, reminding the world that history is never truly gone, only waiting to be unearthed. Through this process, the narrative of the Amun dynasty has been reconstructed not as a linear story of kings and temples, but as a complex human saga. Power, religion, genetics, and mortality intertwine, revealing a dynasty shaped as much by ambition and innovation as by fragility and erasure. The rediscovery reminds us that history is layered and often hidden, requiring persistence, technology, and imagination to fully understand. Modern archaeology also uncovers the consequences of deliberate erasure. Every chiseled name, defaced statue, and obliterated inscription becomes a clue, evidence of both the dynasty's suppression and its endurance. By reading these traces, scholars reconstruct the political, religious, and familial complexities of the Amun period. The story that emerges is one of resilience against deliberate oblivion, a bloodline nearly forgotten, yet returning through stones, bones, and DNA. The rediscovery of these secrets also allows reflection on the universality of human experience. Behind monumental architecture and divine kingship lies daily life, love, ambition, and grief. The intimate artifacts, toys, personal adornments, and household items remind us that these figures were human, navigating challenges, making choices, and suffering consequences. Their stories resonate because they are familiar: power, family, loss, and the desire to be remembered. In the end, modern archaeology has performed a resurrection of memory. By uncovering the Amun ruins, analyzing mummies, and interpreting artifacts, we reconnect with a dynasty that once seemed lost. The work of countless researchers has transformed whispers of history into a vivid human narrative. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and their hidden heirs now live again, not only in tombs and ruins but in the collective imagination, their brilliance, tragedy, and fragility forever illuminated by discovery. The rediscovery of the Amun bloodline is a testament to the endurance of history. Despite political erasure, genetic fragility, and centuries of neglect, the voices of a lost dynasty have returned. Through science, patience, and meticulous study, the once hidden heirs speak, their stories preserved not by decree but by resilience, a reminder that even in the harshest sands of time, memory finds a way to endure. Tutankhamun's name had become synonymous with ancient Egypt, not for the grandeur of his reign, but for the extraordinary preservation of his tomb and the compelling story of his life and death. While his rule was brief and his accomplishments modest in comparison to other pharaohs, his legacy extends far beyond the walls of KV 62. The Boy King, once nearly forgotten, has become a symbol of the intersection between power, fragility, and historical memory, influencing both scholarship and popular imagination for nearly a century. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb transformed perceptions of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Before Howard Carter's excavation, the world knew of pharaohs primarily through grand monuments and written chronicles. Tutankhamun's tomb, however, offered an intimate window into royal life. Personal items, toys, jewelry, and ceremonial objects reveal a young ruler surrounded by both splendor and vulnerability. The artifacts tell a story of a dynasty's final chapter, preserving moments that humanize a figure often mythologized as a golden idol of history. Tutankhamun's legacy is also intertwined with the narrative of restoration. He assumed the throne after the heretic reign of Akhenaten, restoring the worship of Amun and traditional religious practices. In doing so, he attempted to heal a kingdom divided by ideological upheaval. Though young and physically fragile, Tutankhamun's reign symbolized reconciliation, a return to stability after years of religious and political experimentation. His legacy, therefore, is not measured solely by conquest or monumental construction, but by the subtle yet profound impact of restoring social and spiritual balance. Yet it is the human dimension that resonates most powerfully. Tutankhamun's life was marked by vulnerability, congenital disorders, disease, and a body ill-suited for the demands of kingship. His tomb preserves traces of these struggles, from the canes found among his burial items to the careful arrangements made to accommodate his physical limitations. These details transform the boy king from a figure of legend into a relatable human being, navigating the pressures of leadership while contending with extraordinary personal challenges. The legacy of Tutankhamun also lies in the broader understanding of the Amun dynasty. The discovery of his tomb and subsequent studies of related mummies have illuminated the genetic fragility, political intrigues, and familial complexities that define the heretic line. Tutankhamun becomes a lens through which historians and scientists explore the interplay between biology, succession, and historical memory. His life, death, and preservation allow a reconstruction of events and personalities that would otherwise remain lost in time. Beyond scholarship, Tutankhamun's influence permeates culture and imagination. The Boy King has inspired films, novels, exhibitions, and countless artistic interpretations, each highlighting aspects of his story: the brilliance of his reign, the tragedy of his death, and the allure of his golden tomb. His artifacts, displayed around the world, continue to captivate audiences, offering both spectacle and a tangible connection to a civilization that otherwise feels distant and abstract. The treasures themselves carry a narrative of fragility and resilience, of a dynasty knitted arrays yet immortalized through careful preservation. The symbolic power of Tutankhamun also lies in his youth. He represents the vulnerability of human life, even in positions of immense power. The artifacts surrounding him, dolls, miniature chariots, ceremonial objects, remind us that this was a boy thrust into adult responsibilities, facing challenges far beyond his years. His premature death underscores the fragility of life and dynasty alike, making his story emotionally compelling and historically significant. Tutankhamun's tomb further informs modern understanding of Egyptian burial practices, religion, and artistry. The meticulous arrangements, layered shrines, and golden masks reveal the sophistication of funerary traditions and the lengths to which ancient Egyptians went to ensure eternal preservation. Each object reflects beliefs about life, death, and the afterlife, offering insight into the cultural and spiritual values of a society that revered both kings and divine symbolism. Tutankhamun's tomb is therefore both a personal legacy and a cultural testament. Interestingly, his legacy also emphasizes the role of chance in history. Had Tutankhamun lived longer or produced heirs, his reign might have been remembered differently, perhaps overshadowed by successes or lost in the sands of time like other pharaohs. Instead, the accidental preservation of his tomb immortalized him, turning a brief, fragile life into a historical and cultural phenomenon. His legacy is therefore inseparable from the serendipity of discovery, highlighting how history is often shaped by circumstance as much as intention. Tutankhamun's influence also extends to scientific and archaeological methodologies. The study of his remains has pioneered techniques in forensic analysis, CT scanning, and DNA testing, transforming modern understanding of mummification, disease, and royal lineage. Scholars can trace genetic disorders, familial relationships, and even health complications with unprecedented clarity. Through him, ancient Egypt becomes a laboratory for the intersection of archaeology, medicine, and history, making his legacy both inspirational and instructive. Moreover, the Boy King story challenges perceptions of power and memory. While rulers often seek to be remembered through monuments, conquest, or ideological change, Tutankhamun's fame arose from a combination of fragility, accident, and preservation. He exemplifies the idea that historical significance is not always tied to personal ambition or achievement. Sometimes it is the interplay of vulnerability, timing, and preservation that secures a legacy. The emotional resonance of Tutankhamun's story lies in its combination of triumph and tragedy. A young king, physically fragile yet politically significant, who restored a nation's spiritual order and whose tomb survived centuries of deliberate erasure, his life and afterlife encapsulate human resilience and the tension between impermanence and remembrance. Audiences are drawn not only to the gold and splendor, but to the human story of ambition, mortality, and legacy intertwined with the sands of history. Tutankhamun's legacy is also a mirror for reflection. It reminds us that power, brilliance, and historical significance are fragile, subject to the whims of circumstance, biology, and politics. The Boy King's life illustrates that even those born into privilege are vulnerable to forces beyond their control, and that remembrance can arise from both intention and accident. His story encourages a deeper understanding of the complexities of history, where every artifact, inscription, and mummy tells a layered narrative of human triumph and fragility. Finally, Tutankhamun's enduring influence speaks to the timeless fascination with mortality, memory, and the human desire to be remembered. From his tomb in the Valley of the Kings to the halls of museums worldwide, his story continues to captivate and inspire. The Boy King, once nearly lost to time, now stands as a bridge between ancient Egypt and the modern world, embodying both the fragility of life and the enduring power of memory. In essence, Tutankhamun's legacy transcends reign, artifacts, and fame. It is a story of human vulnerability, dynastic fragility, and accidental immortality. It is a testament to the power of preservation, the mysteries of history, and the enduring fascination with a boy king whose life, death, and tomb continue to captivate the world, ensuring that even a fleeting life can leave a permanent mark on history. Beneath the glittering artifacts of Tutankhamun's tomb and the grandeur of Akhenaten's palaces lies a quieter, more tragic story, that of the hidden heirs of the Amun dynasty. These were the children who never ruled, whose names were erased, whose lives were cut short by disease, accident, or deliberate erasure. They remain shadows in the archaeological record, faint echoes of a bloodline nearly obliterated, yet their story is essential to understanding the fragility, vulnerability, and human cost of a revolutionary dynasty. Recent archaeological discoveries and forensic studies have revealed the existence of several children connected to the Amun line. Mummies in tombs KV-35 and KV-55, as well as remains found near Tutankhamun's burial site, suggest multiple offspring, including stillborn daughters and sons who died in infancy or early childhood. The horrid and modest burials, coupled with the absence of inscriptions, indicate that these children were deliberately obscured from public memory, perhaps to protect the political stability of the kingdom. Genetic studies have confirmed the close familial relationships among these hidden heirs. Tutankhamun himself was a product of incestuous unions, a practice intended to preserve royal blood. His siblings, both known and newly identified through DNA, also suffer from congenital disorders, including cleft palate, clubfoot, and spinal deformities. These inherited fragilities offer insight into the high mortality rates among royal children and illustrate the perilous nature of dynastic succession in ancient Egypt. Every child who failed to survive represents not only personal tragedy but a political crisis, as the line of succession remained precarious. The forgotten daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti are particularly poignant. Archaeological evidence suggests that at least 2 daughters were interred in hastily prepared tombs, their existence almost entirely erased from inscriptions and monuments. These young princesses, too fragile or politically inconvenient to be remembered, became invisible witnesses to a dynasty in turmoil. Their lives, though brief, are revealed through subtle clues, miniature coffins, small statues, and remnants of burial gifts, whispering stories of innocence caught in the crossfire of political, religious, and familial upheaval. Even the surviving sons of the Amun line suffered invisibility. Bones and inscriptions suggest that a few may have survived infancy but died before achieving public prominence. The practice of erasing names from monuments, combined with the natural fragility of the family, means that much of their existence is reconstructed through forensic and archaeological deduction. These lost heirs serve as a reminder that dynastic power was fragile and that even royal children were subject to the vulnerabilities of mortality and politics. The erasure of these heirs was both intentional and symbolic. By removing references to certain children, Horem and A sought to solidify their authority and erase the Amun influence. Tombs were left unfinished, inscriptions chiseled away, and artifacts either destroyed or reproposed. Yet paradoxically, this very erasure has allowed modern archaeology to detect anomalies, subtle traces, and patterns that reveal the hidden lineage. Every vanished name, fragmented coffin, and misaligned grave becomes evidence of the lives that once were, allowing a story of resilience and loss to emerge. The psychological and emotional toll on surviving family members is also apparent. Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's widow, faced immense pressure, both politically and personally, after the deaths of her husband and the other heirs. Evidence from correspondence and historical texts suggests desperation, including her controversial plea to the Hittite king for a foreign husband, highlighting the stakes of preserving the bloodline. The loss of children, combined with political maneuvering, illustrates the intersection of personal grief and dynastic necessity. Archaeology reveals more than names and bones. It reveals rituals of care, mourning, and protection. Even hastily prepared tombs often contain items intended for the afterlife, miniature figurines, food offerings, and personal belongings. These objects demonstrate that, despite political expediency, ancient Egyptians sought to honor and preserve the dignity of the young, even those whom history later attempted to erase. The hidden heirs were remembered, quietly, in ways that were subtle but significant. The study of these lost children also illuminates broader patterns of mortality in ancient Egypt. High infant and child mortality rates were exacerbated among royal families due to genetic practices intended to preserve dynastic purity. The Amun bloodline, with its heavy intermarriage, suffered disproportionately. Medical and genetic analyses show that many of these children likely succumbed to congenital disorders, infectious disease, or physical weakness, highlighting the intersection of biology and dynasty in shaping history. Importantly, the hidden heirs provide context for understanding Tutankhamun's reign. The survival of a single boy king, after the loss of siblings and other heirs, demonstrates how fragile succession had become. Tutankhamun's premature death further destabilized the line, paving the way for Akhenaten to intervene and erase the remaining traces of the Amun bloodline. In this sense, the story of the hidden heirs is inseparable from the larger narrative of power, erasure, and political consolidation. Artifacts associated with these lost heirs are particularly moving. Small statues, delicate jewelry, and miniature chariots were intended to accompany them into the afterlife, a silent testament to love, grief, and hope. While the children's names may have been removed from monuments, these objects preserve their memory in a tangible, human way. Archaeologists and historians interpret these remnants not just as cultural artifacts, but as emotional signifiers, connecting modern audiences to the intimate experiences of a long-forgotten generation. The hidden heirs also reflect the vulnerability of memory itself. Royal names and achievements can be erased from history, but traces, bones, artifacts, and tombs endure, offering future generations the opportunity to reconstruct lost narratives. The Amun children remind us that history is not a complete record but a mosaic of fragments, waiting for careful analysis, interpretation, and imagination to reveal the full story. Finally, the narrative of these lost princes and princesses evokes a profound emotional resonance. Their lives, brief and often tragic, highlight the human cost of political ambition, dynastic fragility, and religious upheaval. They were born into privilege but also into vulnerability, their existence threatened by both biology and history. Yet through modern archaeology and forensic study, they are gradually restored to memory, offering a glimpse into the intimate, often overlooked dimensions of ancient royal life. In essence, the hidden heirs of the Amun dynasty embody fragility, resilience, and the enduring power of memory. Their forgotten lives are inseparable from the larger story of Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, and the erasure imposed by Akhenaten. By uncovering their existence, modern scholars remind us that history is more than monuments and kings. It is a collection of lives, triumphs, and tragedies that together create a human narrative, capable of transcending even deliberate attempts at oblivion. The visual legacy of the Amun dynasty stands apart from all other periods of ancient Egyptian history. Akhenaten's radical artistic revolution shattered conventions that had defined the pharaohs for centuries. Statues, reliefs, and frescoes from this era portray elongated faces, exaggerated limbs, intimate family scenes, and unprecedented naturalism, a bold departure from the rigid, idealized forms that dominated Egyptian art. These creations, once denounced and erased, now serve as enduring symbols of a dynasty that dared to defy tradition, offering both beauty and insight into a turbulent historical experiment. Art under Akhenaten was inseparable from ideology. The heretic pharaoh sought to establish a monotheistic worship of Aten, the sun disk, replacing centuries of polytheistic devotion. His artistic choices reflected this theological upheaval. Pharaohs were no longer distant, untouchable figures. They became humanized, engaged in domestic activities with their family, basking in the life-giving rays of Aten. These images communicated both political and spiritual messages, intertwining divine authority with intimate, human experience. Through art, the Amun rulers conveyed a vision of the world in which the pharaoh was simultaneously god and parent, ruler and participant in the rhythms of daily life. The most striking feature of Amun art is its departure from idealized symmetry. Akhenaten's elongated skull, full lips, narrow waist, and broad hips appear across numerous statues and reliefs, suggesting either deliberate exaggeration to symbolize divine uniqueness or the realistic depiction of his own physical features. Nefertiti and the royal children are depicted with similar stylization, emphasizing familial unity and the distinctive qualities of this bloodline. Scholars have debated whether these features reflect a hereditary condition, artistic license, or a symbolic choice. Regardless, they convey a striking visual identity that separates Amarna art from both the past and the restored Egyptian canon that followed. Frescoes from Amarna reveal an unprecedented intimacy within the royal household. Scenes depict Akhenaten and Nefertiti playing with their children, embracing in public view, and receiving the sun's blessing together. These depictions humanize the pharaohs in a way previously unseen, transforming them from distant divine figures into approachable, loving parents. For historians, these artworks provide rare insight into the emotional and domestic life of a royal family, revealing tenderness, care, and vulnerability amidst the pressures of power and ideological revolution. The innovations extended to architecture as well. Open-air temples, designed to allow direct sunlight onto altars and statues, reflected the theological focus on Aten. Buildings were lighter, more spacious, and less adorned than the traditional monumental structures of the New Kingdom, emphasizing natural light, visibility, and access. These changes reinforce the ideological shift. Religion was no longer cloistered in shadowed sanctuaries, but celebrated openly in the warmth of the sun that symbolized divine presence. Art and architecture together communicated a radical worldview, inseparable from the Amarna bloodline's vision. The defacement and destruction of Amarna art by subsequent pharaohs, especially Horem, underscores its political significance. Statues were broken, reliefs chiseled, and frescoes painted over, as if the imagery itself threatened the restored order. Yet even in fragments, the power of Amarna art survives. Archaeologists reconstruct these pieces to uncover both their aesthetic brilliance and the messages embedded in them. Familial intimacy, divine authority, and the fragile balance between innovation and tradition. The very attempt at erasure enhances the intrigue, highlighting how art can endure even when memory is under attack. Color played a pivotal role in Amarna symbolism. Vivid reds, blues, and gold highlighted key figures, divine symbols, and the sun's rays, bringing scenes to life and imbuing them with spiritual significance. Frescoes often show the royal family bathed in the sunlight of Aten, emphasizing the divine favor and unity of the dynasty. Every hue and stroke reinforced the ideological and emotional messages, demonstrating how art communicated ideas that words alone could not convey. The children of the Amarna dynasty, often hidden in tombs or erased from monuments, are prominently featured in this artistic record. Small figures of princesses and princes, depicted playing or being blessed, reveal both their political importance and human vulnerability. These depictions offer invaluable insight into the dynasty's private life, preserving the memory of young heirs who would otherwise be lost to history. Through these intimate images, modern audiences can witness the emotional bonds within a family that faced extraordinary pressure, fragility, and eventual erasure. Amarna art also provides clues about the broader cultural and religious shifts of the period. The prominence of Aten, the focus on sunlight, and the intimate, almost informal depictions of the royal family were a deliberate ideological statement. They challenged centuries of visual convention, asserting a new order in which the pharaoh's power was intertwined with devotion to a single deity, familial unity, and human accessibility. In this way, art becomes both evidence and manifesto, encoding political, spiritual, and personal messages into stone, plaster, and pigment. The modern rediscovery of Amarna art has reignited fascination with this forbidden dynasty. Scholars, historians, and the public marvel at its elegance, audacity, and emotional resonance. Exhibitions worldwide showcase the beauty and strangeness of these artifacts, connecting contemporary audiences to a civilization that balanced grandeur with intimacy, power with vulnerability. The art becomes a bridge between past and present, revealing a dynasty that was both visionary and fragile, human and divine. Even the unfinished or defaced works carry powerful meaning. Chiseled faces and broken statues are silent testimony to the conflict between innovation and restoration, to the power struggles that erase much of the Amarna legacy. In their imperfection, these works remind us of the human drama underlying every dynasty: ambition, fear, rebellion, and a relentless desire to be remembered. The fragments invite imagination, allowing modern observers to reconstruct not only the visuals but the stories, tensions, and emotions embedded within them. Art from this period also informs our understanding of gender and power. Nefertiti is depicted alongside Akhenaten, often equal in prominence, suggesting an unusual degree of female authority and visibility. The royal daughters and sons are included in scenes of worship and domestic life, emphasizing family cohesion and continuity. These representations challenge modern assumptions about ancient hierarchies, revealing a nuanced approach to gender, succession, and divine representation within the Amun dynasty. In essence, Amun art is more than aesthetic achievement. It is a symbolic language, a testament to a dynasty that defied convention and faced obliteration. Through stylized forms, intimate depictions, and bold architectural choices, it communicates the ambitions, ideologies, and vulnerabilities of family whose memory was nearly erased. Each artifact, fragment, and fresco is a surviving voice from a dynasty once condemned, now speaking across millennia with clarity, emotion, and power. The enduring impact of Amun art lies in its ability to connect viewers to the humanity of a forgotten dynasty. It reminds us that history is not only a record of kings and conquests, but of intimate lives, family bonds, and personal struggles. The visual innovations of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children capture the essence of a dynasty both extraordinary and fragile, offering a window into a world that sought to challenge tradition, embrace innovation, and leave a mark that even erasure could not fully erase. Ultimately, Amun art stands as a bridge between rebellion and restoration, fragility and resilience, human and divine. It is a visual testament to a dynasty erased from official memory yet immortalized through creativity, innovation, and emotional resonance. Through these images, the hidden A's, the boy king, and the visionary rulers of Amun continue to speak, reminding us that art preserves not only beauty but the enduring spirit of those who dared to defy history itself. History is filled with what ifs, and the Amun dynasty presents some of the most tantalizing questions of all. What if Akhenaten's religious revolution had succeeded? What if Tutankhamun had lived longer or produced heirs? What if the hidden children of this fragile bloodline had survived to inherit the throne? Each possibility opens a window into a parallel Egypt, a civilization shaped not by restoration and erasure, but by continuation, innovation, and unbroken lineage. The answers remain speculative, yet they illuminate both the fragility and the extraordinary potential of a dynasty nearly wiped from memory. One of the most enduring questions centers on Akhenaten himself. His vision of a single deity, Aten, represented a radical departure from millennia of polytheism. If his line had persisted, could Egypt have become a monotheistic civilization centuries before Abrahamic religions emerged? Could temples of Amun and other gods have been permanently replaced, transforming culture, politics, and society in ways we can barely imagine? Archaeologists and historians debate not only the practicality of such a revolution, but also the profound cultural consequences of its potential success. Akhenaten's failure, however, highlights the difficulty of imposing ideological change on deeply rooted traditions, especially when the pharaoh's own bloodline was so fragile. The survival of Tutankhamun presents another captivating scenario. Had the boy king lived into adulthood, married, and produced heirs, the Amun line might have stabilized, creating a bridge between ideological innovation and dynastic continuity. This continuity could have prevented and Horem from erasing the lineage, preserving a revolution that blended monotheism with traditional authority. A surviving Tutankhamun dynasty might have reshaped religious, artistic, and political norms, potentially altering the course of Egyptian civilization and leaving a drastically different legacy for the new kingdom. The hidden A's themselves also fuel speculation. Genetic studies suggest that several children of Akhenaten and Nefertiti had the potential to survive and reproduce. If even a few had lived, the Amun bloodline could have endured, perhaps producing pharaohs who combined innovative thinking with strategic acumen. The political landscape of Egypt would have been transformed. Rival factions might have been subdued, religious institutions adapted rather than restored, and the ideological imprint of Atenism may have persisted. In this alternate history, Egypt could have entered a new golden age under a lineage that modern historians can now only reconstruct through bones, inscriptions, and conjecture. Some scholars propose that the Amun dynasty suppression was as much a reaction to fragility as ideology. The deaths of heirs and the early demise of Tutankhamun created a power vacuum, which and Horem exploited. Had the children survived, this vacuum may never have existed, preventing the campaign of erasure that obscured the dynasty for centuries. In this sense, the survival of the Amun heirs was not just about succession, but about the very memory of a revolutionary family. By erasing them, the restored pharaohs rewrote history. Had they survived, the narrative might have been radically different. The artistic legacy also invites what-if speculation. Amun art broke conventions, depicting intimacy, individuality, and human vulnerability in ways never before seen. If the dynasty had endured, could these visual styles have become mainstream, influencing subsequent Egyptian dynasties? Temples, statues, and tombs might have continued the artistic revolution, creating a visually distinct new kingdom that celebrated family, individuality, and ideological innovation. The aesthetic consequences of survival are as compelling as the political or religious ones, highlighting how creativity and power intertwine in shaping culture. Medical and genetic perspectives offer further insight. The Amun line was plagued by hereditary conditions, likely exacerbated by intermarriage. If the dynasty had survived, would these genetic vulnerabilities have threatened its long-term viability? Perhaps continued survival would have required careful alliances with non-royal families, introducing genetic diversity that might have strengthened future generations. Alternatively, ongoing intermarriage could have accelerated decline, suggesting that even in the best-case scenario, the dynasty faced enormous biological and political hurdles. The mystery of the dynasty's potential also extends to religion and ideology. Atenism, with its emphasis on sunlight and divine unity, might have evolved into a lasting spiritual tradition. Future pharaohs could have reconciled monotheism with traditional practices, creating a hybrid religious system that balanced innovation with continuity. Temples and shrines, frescoes, and inscriptions might have reflected this synthesis, offering modern archaeologists a radically different historical record and a civilization shaped by experimentation and adaptation rather than abrupt restoration. Even the hidden political consequences are worth considering. The surviving Amun dynasty might have forged stronger international alliances, perhaps stabilizing relationships with neighboring kingdoms such as the Hittites and Mitanni. Diplomatic marriages, treaties, and military campaigns could have strengthened Egypt's influence, altering the balance of power in the ancient Near East. The implications extend far beyond the Nile Valley, suggesting that the survival of a single bloodline might have reverberated across continents and centuries. Of course, these scenarios remain speculative, yet they serve a crucial purpose. They illuminate the fragility and contingency of history. The Amun dynasty demonstrates how the lives of a few individuals, children, kings, and queens, can shape the trajectory of civilizations. Each death, each erased name, each act of preservation or destruction altered the course of Egypt's history. By imagining what might have been, we gain insight into the stakes of power, the consequences of mortality, and the enduring tension between ambition and vulnerability. The intrigue of these theories is intensified by the gaps in the archaeological record. Tombs left unfinished, inscriptions partially erased, and mummies whose identities remain uncertain all invite speculation. Every fragment becomes a portal to alternate realities, a doorway to what could have been if the dynasty had endured. Historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts alike are drawn into this web of possibility, reconstructing scenarios that blend evidence with imagination, fact with conjecture. Furthermore, these what-if questions highlight the role of chance and accident in history. Tutankhamun's tomb survived by luck. Akhenaten's city of Amun are left ruined by circumstance, and the hidden heirs are known only through fragments and forensic reconstruction. Without these elements of chance, the Amun dynasty might have been utterly forgotten, leaving modern society with no trace of its revolutionary ideas, intimate family life, or artistic brilliance. History, therefore, is revealed not as a linear narrative but as a fragile tapestry, woven from both intent and accident. Finally, the allure of these theories lies in their emotional resonance. Imagining the survival of the Amun dynasty evokes both hope and melancholy, hope for what might have been, melancholy for what was lost. The hidden heirs, the fragile boy king, and the visionary Akhenaten are transformed from distant historical figures into compelling characters in a human drama that spans millennia. Their story invites reflection on power, mortality, and memory, reminding us that history is never fixed, but constantly reshaped by chance, choice, and discovery. In essence, the Amun dynasty's what-if scenarios illuminate the fragility of legacy and the power of imagination. They remind us that history is not inevitable, that every dynasty, every family, every individual shapes the course of civilizations in ways both subtle and profound. By contemplating what might have been, we gain not only insight into the past, but a deeper understanding of how human ambition, vulnerability, and creativity continue to shape the world across generations. As the sun sets over the Valley of the Kings, the ruins of Amarna and the golden treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb whisper stories that have endured for millennia. The Amarna dynasty, though almost obliterated by history, continues to echo across time, offering lessons that transcend the details of pharaohs, tombs, and temples. Their story is a meditation on ambition, fragility, legacy, and the human desire to be remembered, a reminder that even the most carefully orchestrated erasures cannot fully extinguish memory. The lives of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and their hidden heirs illustrate the precarious balance between power and vulnerability. They were a family capable of reshaping an empire, yet constrained by biology, politics, and fate. Their experiences underscore a fundamental truth: even greatness is fragile. Decisions made in youth, acts of religious innovation, and the management of family and succession all carried enormous stakes. The dynasty's rise and fall highlight that leadership is as much about resilience and foresight as it is about ambition and vision. Their story also teaches us about the impermanence of human constructs. Temples can be demolished, inscriptions erased, and names forgotten, yet the essence of a dynasty, the evidence of its existence, persists in fragments, artifacts, and stories. Archaeology and modern technology have allowed us to hear these whispers from the past, reconstructing lives and events that were deliberately obscured. The Amarna bloodline reminds us that history is a mosaic of survival and loss, shaped by both intention and accident. The intimate glimpses preserved in art and artifacts reveal that legacy is not only measured by power or conquest, but by human connection. The tender depictions of royal families playing with their children, the funerary objects meant to accompany lost heirs, and the personal adornments of kings and queens tell us more about emotional depth than monumental inscriptions ever could. Memory, in its truest sense, is sustained by the human experiences, love, grief, hope, and courage, that endure even when names are erased. The Amarna dynasty story also emphasizes the cost of innovation and defiance. Akhenaten dared to transform religion, society, and art, but such radical change brought both admiration and enmity. The dynasty's eventual erasure was a response to its audacity, highlighting the tension between vision and acceptance. Change often comes at a price, and history remembers both those who dare and those who resist. This tension resonates across centuries, reminding us that progress is intertwined with risk and survival is never guaranteed. Equally, the hidden heirs of the dynasty illustrate the universal vulnerability of life. Children born into privilege still face mortality, disease, and political vulnerability. Their erased names and hastily prepared tombs serve as somber reminders of human fragility and the impermanence of status. Yet even in their near invisibility, they contribute to our understanding of history, proving that every life, no matter how brief, leaves an imprint. They teach that memory and influence are not solely the domain of the powerful, but can emerge through careful preservation and discovery. The rediscovery of a dynasty also offers hope, that what is lost may be found, and what is silenced may yet speak. Archaeology, forensic science, and persistent scholarship have resurrected voices thought gone forever. The Amarna rulers, long condemned as heretics and nearly erased from memory, now return to us through ruins, mummies, and art. Their story encourages reflection on the resilience of history, the persistence of evidence, and the human capacity to reconstruct meaning from fragments of the past. Moreover, the Amarna legacy invites us to contemplate the consequences of human choices. Political ambition, religious revolution, familial alliances, and erasures shape the trajectory of this dynasty in profound ways. Each decision, each act of defacement, each burial ritual had ripple effects across centuries. History, we see, is not a passive record but a dynamic interplay of action, intention, and chance. The dynasty's rise, fall, and rediscovery exemplify the delicate architecture of human memory and legacy. The lessons extend beyond history into the realm of reflection. The Amarna bloodline prompts us to consider how we remember and honor the past, how we interpret fragments of evidence, and how we reconstruct the lives of those who came before us. It challenges us to recognize the humanity in historical figures, to see kings and queens not as symbols alone, but as people navigating ambition, vulnerability, and love. It reminds us that the stories of the forgotten are often the most instructive, for they reveal resilience, courage, and the subtle ways in which memory endures. Finally, the echoes of the Amun dynasty linger in our collective imagination because they speak to timeless human concerns, the desire for remembrance, the struggle against mortality, and the interplay of ambition, love, and loss. Their art, tombs, and DNA connect us across millennia, bridging the gap between past and present. They teach that even when names are erased and deeds obscured, the essence of human life, its emotions, struggles, and achievements, endures, waiting to be discovered, understood, and remembered. In closing, the story of the Amun bloodline is both cautionary and inspiring. It warns of the fragility of power, the consequences of innovation, and the impermanence of human constructs. Yet it also inspires, demonstrating that legacy is more than monuments and inscriptions. It is preserved in memory, in artifacts, and in the stories that survive deliberate erasure. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and their hidden heirs remind us that history, even when nearly lost, can echo eternally, offering wisdom, wonder, and reflection to those willing to listen. Through the whispers of sand, the fragments of art, and the silent remains of tombs, the Amun dynasty continues to speak. It teaches us that no bloodline is ever truly lost, no memory ever completely silenced, and that the pursuit of understanding the past is a human endeavor that transcends time. As we gaze upon their art, read the traces of inscriptions, and study their remains, we are reminded that history is not static. It is a living conversation across centuries. The dynasty may have been condemned to oblivion, yet its echoes endure, calling us to remember, reflect, and marvel at the fragile brilliance of lives once hidden but never truly gone. The eternal echoes of this lost bloodline remind us that history is both a record and a revelation, shaped by the choices, risks, and vulnerabilities of those who lived it. And as we close this chapter on the Amun dynasty, we are left with a profound question. What if these secrets, now uncovered, change the way we see history itself?